Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1361, A Fierce Battle. While they had a heated discussion among themselves, they saw a bright silver light being dragged along in Rocher's hand. The light was suspended and sometimes it lengthened, sometimes it sharpened, sometimes it was fanning out, and sometimes it was rippling like a wave. In fact, not many people could clearly see his sword, but only the light occasionally reflected from its glittering surface. There were still many extremely powerful weapons in the universe that had yet to leave their names on the spirit tablet. For example, the heaven and earth mirror of the celestial position race, and the evil door of Supreme Lord of Original Sin. The light in Rocher's eyes flickered with intensity. His attack had become like a tempest, yet it did not inflict any damage on Kurt despite its high speed. Kurt's methods were too strange, filling Rocher with a foreboding of danger. It seemed that Kurt was an opponent who could see what would happen in the future. Therefore, although Rocher's speed was already unimaginably fast, Kurt was still able to wield his 9-ring staff almost leisurely to block Rocher's attack. Somehow, he had known when Rocher would seek to deliver the fatal blow. Even Kurt's occasional counterattack offered a huge threat to Rocher. If I am not wrong, you can see the future, Rocher observed easily. Kurt brought his palms together and slightly shook the 9-ring staff. The only one who can see the future is not me, but Maitreya. By mentioning Maitreya, he was referring to the Buddha of the future. Rocher wasn't interested in the enlightenment of Buddhist words. He once again placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. Well then, if I were to cut your staff to pieces, how would you defend against my sword then? As soon as he finished speaking, he unsheathed his sword from the scabbard, and he transformed into a ray of light as he rushed forward. Zen nodded his head from where he was watching on the stone. Rocher's analysis was correct. In the first round of this fierce duel, Rocher might not have been able to injure Kurt, but one of the rings on his staff had been broken during combat. The 9 rings of the staff were deeply connected to each other, signifying the 9 worlds of Buddhism. Powerhouses like Kurt were able to instantly open the 9 overlapping worlds, and they could trap their opponents within them, rendering their opponents lost and unable to escape. Therefore, Rocher, having managed to break a ring of the staff, had actually gained the advantage. Even when Rocher was walking in the light, Kurt's face remained impassive. He continued using his staff to block Rocher's sword. In the blink of an eye, Rocher unleashed a flurry of sword strikes. The speed of his blade was so fast that it was suffocating to watch. Tinkling, clang, following a series of crisp breaking sounds, another golden ring snapped apart. Rocher didn't hesitate for even a moment as he continued to circle around Kurt and unleash many more fearsome sword strikes. Not long after, a third golden ring shattered, its broken curves slipping to the board. Then a fourth one, then a fifth one. When the last golden ring finally shattered, the 9-ring staff, which had originally been glowing with a glorious light, suddenly dimmed and went dark. For this staff to be hailed as a supreme divine weapon, it had relied on the 9 golden rings inlaid upon it. After the rings were all shattered, its power dropped, and its level instantly fell. Now, it could be considered as nothing more than a first-rank divine weapon. In the hidden spirit temple, many monks sat cross-legged on the ground, chanting in low voices. A few of the esteemed monks were staring up at the painting. The 9-ring staff has shattered. It's normal. The sword attacks were sharp, and they were unleashed at a terrible speed. Kurt simply couldn't block them all. Everyone knows that the staff is famous for its 9 rings, but no one knows that the Asura is hidden inside. The 9 rings are merely shackles. Kurt has borrowed and studied the power of his opponent. Clang. Returning his sword back to its scabbard, Rocher stood to the side as he asked in an indifferent tone, "How are you going to block my sword strikes now?" Kurt looked at the staff in his hand, but there was no sign of anxiety on his face. Buddhism advocates great freedom, but the 9 worlds were built as shackles. The world we live in is like an illusion, and yet it can hold the Asura. As he spoke, the top of the staff started to glow with a bloody aura, and instantly, scarlet blood flowed from the top, trickling down over Kurt's hands that were clasped around the staff. At the same time, Kurt's temperament underwent a drastic change. He had originally had an amiable look on his face, but at this moment, his expression had turned ferocious. His calm eyes were consumed by a ruthless aura. Asura. As a sacred object of the hidden spirit temple, the nine-ring staff was rarely seen. Its first form had been more than enough to deal with the enemies of this world. However, there was a terrible secret hidden within the sacred staff. Inside it an evil spirit was sealed, which was also known as Asura. Should the nine rings be destroyed, the staff's body would become possessed by the Asura. While Kurt looked at his bloody hands, his ears became extremely sharp and lengthened. He no longer resembled a human, but a monster instead. However, his voice had remained calm. Transforming into the Asura is not allowed within Buddhist practice, but the path of Buddhism that I practice strives for the freedom of good and evil. It can be said that it's a free way of Buddhism. Hence, I can transform into the Asura. After explaining, he grabbed the staff and thrust downwards. Pop! Many cracks began to spread out along with the staff, as the ringless staff began to vibrate. The 1,000,000-foot-long heaven-earth board was considered not large by martial artists. With Kurt's light tap, the surging force spread out, turning the entire board into rubble that shot up into the air before instantly collapsing to dust. Rocher drew his sword and floated up into the air to confront Kurt. Rocher, you have to be careful. After Kurt transformed into the Asura, his speed had become strange and his movements unfathomable. Kurt circled around in the air once before he sent out numerous staff shadows, which covered the sky and the earth in darkness as they headed towards Rocher. Great Wise Staff Technique. After Kurt drew near, Rocher once again stepped on the light he carried, and in a flash he had traveled a great distance away. The Great Wise Staff Technique was extremely fearsome. Combined with the Asura form, the cutting force of the staff was unstoppable. Rocher had no choice but to retreat in the face of the deadly assault. However, Kurt didn't want to leave Rocher even the slightest chance. As he executed the Great Wise Staff Technique, the staff shadows covered the sky and blocked out the sun as they headed towards Rocher. Humph! The light beneath Rocher's feet flickered as he traveled like a meteor, speeding through the layers of staff shadows. Although the shadows were densely arrayed, they didn't even touch Rocher's sleeves at all. Although Kurt brandished tens of thousands of staff shadows, a kind of different foresight appeared in his eyes. The scene from the future was extremely hazy, but every single image had crystal clear value to him. It was a scene that would happen 9 seconds later. After 9 seconds, Rocher would suddenly circle behind him. 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 9 seconds. 9 seconds later, Kurt had already taken a step forward and placed his staff protectively behind his back. Clang! The staff accurately blocked Rocher's anticipated sword attack. Rocher's attack failed, and he immediately withdrew with a slight frown wrinkling his brow. Kurt could see the future, so he could anticipate every single move in advance. This was indeed troublesome. This battle was proving even more difficult than Rocher had imagined. None of the warriors who could make it into the top 5 were weak. Not only were they nearly perfect in every aspect, but they also possessed extraordinary theurgy. A cold light flickered in Rocher's eyes as he stared up at the numerous staff shadows descending upon him. He needed a different method, now. Clearly, he had not expected that before he could change his moves, Kurt had already been one step ahead of him. Kurt intended to suppress Rocher, and gave him no chance to fight back. Chapter 1362, Soaring Snake. Kurt had always remained calm. His actions were unhurried but were carried out with care and confidence. He was never that harsh when facing a weaker opponent. However, the same couldn't be said when he met stronger foes that were close to his level. Everyone witnessed how confident and calculated his moves were when he faced Lawson. Despite his precision in fighting, however, the audience still found his performance lackluster. An image flashed before Kurt's eyes before he finally took action. He was someone who cultivated the future constellation Kalpa. This cultivation method gifted him with the blessed Buddha land skill that enabled him to see into the future, the constellation eyes. As he poured life vitality into his eyes, he would be able to see into a specific moment in the future that was reflected in his pupils. There were only 2 warriors who mastered this theurgy. One was Kurt himself, and the other was the Buddhist abbot of the Hidden Spirit Temple. Kurt had the ability to see 9 seconds into the future. Half a minute more would be too blurry, while a full minute would simply yield him nothing. The scene he saw half a minute later painted a horrible picture. Rocher activated his extremely sharp theurgy and killed him. The blur prevented Kurt from making out the exact theurgy Rocher used, so he wouldn't be able to shield himself against it. He could only take the initiative and launch the attack. Scorching Sun Theurgy, Kurt yelled. He stretched out his palms from which he launched a giant Buddhist wheel. The Buddhist wheel shone brightly, like a blinding, dazzling sun. There was actually no such thing as a godly genius in the cultivation of Buddhism. Buddhist cultivation was divided into 4 levels of meditation. It was only after the final, 4th level would one be finally able to practice the thirji. Only when a warrior was able to use a thirji could he really live and breathe Buddhism. In a sense, he was a godly genius of the godly way. Since Qart had already gone beyond the 4th level and mastered the thirji, he could then be considered as a godly genius of the blessed Buddha land. The thirji came in the form of thousands of golden palm prints that crashed down over Rocher. Buddhism was grand. It was not an exaggeration to say that this thirji had the power to possibly ruin the world. Even Zen, Nathan, and the other godly geniuses were shocked at this display of sheer power. This little monk, how could he be so powerful? Scorching Sun Thirji, he cultivated the most powerful thirji of the hidden spirit temple. Warriors from the blessed Buddha land have always been uninterested in fighting, but they have a profound heritage. That Rocher will be defeated by the grand Buddhist heritage. The scene in front of them truly widened their horizons. It was a mere battle between 2 Soul Sea Realm warriors, but this sudden climax was extremely overwhelming. A few Spirit Supreme Realm and Spirit Transformation Realm warriors even shivered. Not many of them were confident that they'd be able to withstand such a strong attack. The speed at which the golden palms crashed down wasn't fast, but they were as dense as the entire heavens crashing down on one's body. This thirji is really strong, Rocher muttered worriedly. As the golden sky crashed down, he raised his long sword above his head. A silver light emanated from the sword, but it grew dimmer by the second. This was the first time that the others looked at the sword properly. It was normal, around 1.1 meters long. The blade was 2 fingers wide with a wooden hilt and a ridge in the middle. There was nothing special about this sword. It looked extremely ordinary. However, beyond its simplistic design were 2 words carved onto the blade: Soaring Snake. The Soaring Snake. This sword belonged to the Lord of Weapons. It was Qiyu's sword. Qiyu is Chinese weaponry god. According to legend, he invented many deadly weapons. All the most powerful weapons, whether it might be a knife, spear, sword or halberd, were made by the Lord of Weapons. The most powerful knife ever made was named the Tiger Soul. Then there was also the sword named Soaring Snake. There was a spear called the Fierce Killing. Then a halberd by the name of the Devil Killing. A set of armor named as the Luminous Light. A crossbow called the Sky Piercing. And lastly, a dagger axe known as the Destructive War. The Soaring Snake was considered as the strongest weapon among the supreme primordial weapons. It was also formerly a missing heritage of the Lord of Weapons, Qiyu. The Soaring Snake evolved into a dragon and the pole star twinkled. A noble man should act like a dragon and walk the way to justice. Rocher chanted. The heavenly sword he comprehended back then contained the justice godly way. Cultivating the heavenly sword illustration was the only way to find Qiyu's treasure. The heavenly sword illustration that was discovered and spread all over the world was the key to such a powerful weapon. However, Rocher was the only one who succeeded in cultivating it after so many years. He was called by the treasure into the savage land where he found it. Rocher's lotus flower was the same as Zen's at that time, blooming continually to the last petal. He already knew his destiny. The universe was just an interlude. And this illusion battlefield was his ladder. Buzz. A streak of light flashed underneath Rocher and shot up high in the sky like a pillar. This light pierced through the clouds, the star group, and even the illusion battlefield. The pillar was seen by so many warriors in the universe as it rose up straight out of nowhere. Alas, darn it, the mysterious girl stared at the light pillar that suddenly showed up beside her. He actually found Qiyu's sword. What change will happen in this round of Grand Era? It's really hard to figure out. The thought depressed her, suddenly finding her job difficult to handle. What an odd scene. I've seen 33 apocalyptic astronomical phenomena and endless auspicious clouds, but this is the first time I ever saw a light pillar like this, a Supreme Lord remarked. What did he do? What a beautiful light pillar. Carl stood on top of the stone and was also shocked at the appearance of Rocher's golden pillar. A noble man should act like a dragon, he murmured. Carl had been cultivating the justice godly way. His lotus flower had completely bloomed, however, his comprehension of justice had gotten more and more radical. He also got lost for a time. Seeing the justice godly way Rocher activated was like seeing a light break through the darkness. He did not realize how off path he had been until he saw the light. Whoosh! Rocher stepped forward and bathed himself in the light. He held the Soaring Snake in front of his chest and faced those golden palm prints. As he held his sword up, the sword suddenly emitted a dazzling sword light. This was the ultimate justice of the swordsmanship. Splash! The light emanated from the blade in waves. Reflected in these waves were the golden palm prints. As the two made contact, the waves shattered, like bright, dazzling glass. It wasn't just the waves though. The palm prints also shattered at the same time. The waves were weaved from Rocher's sword light. Nobody had seen it coming. Nobody realized that this soaring snake was actually everywhere. Kurt's confidence broke and his brows furrowed at the events that had just transpired. His shoulders slumped the moment he decided to yield to his opponent. Because he already saw what would happen 9 seconds later. What would happen half a minute later was blurry because it was still uncertain, so Kurt would fight tooth and nail to change the fate. However, what would happen 9 seconds later was so clear, indicating its certainty. He could not do anything to change that. The scene flashed before his eyes. It was him, covered by the waves similar to the ones produced by Rocher. That was the moment Kurt knew that he was to die by Rocher's sword. There was no need to resist. 3 seconds passed. And then 6. Pretty soon, the 9 seconds were up. Everything was just like what his constellation eyes showed him. The invisible sword intent skimmed through his body. Rocher overpowered Kurt and eventually broke his scorching sun thurgy. The waves of light shattered and disappeared, along with Kurt's body. The results were evidently clear. Rocher won. The heaven-earth board quietly reconstructed itself, mending each line and point with white and black stones. Rocher sheathed his soaring snake back into its scabbard. There was a slight clink as his blade was put away while the entire universe was plunged into silence. The performances of these godly geniuses were truly amazing. There were 10 of them and each had the potential to become the universe's top warriors in the world of chaos. Kurt, Lawson, Carl, all of them. This was a generation of amazingly powerful talents. But what Rocher displayed just now was way beyond everyone's expectations. The new great world. This is truly the beginning of the new great world of chaos. Ha ha, someone shouted in glee and broke the silence. The warriors, who had initially been stunned by the battle's outcome, finally came to their senses. Is he, really from, your Cloud Hall? Preston asked, not really believing what he witnessed just now. He was a spirit transformation realm master, 2 realms higher than Rocher. But he knew that he would even lose to this young man if he fought with him. How in the world could he do that though? He was 2 realms below. Right, Letitia nodded with a smile. The pride was evident on her face. Chapter 1363, in a stalemate. The power that Rocher displayed had impressed many supreme lords in the universe. All of them wanted to draw him over to their respective sides, but Rocher was a member of the Thoughtless Minds. The fact had the 4 great clans thrilled. Out of nowhere, Rocher suddenly made his way into the top 5, something nobody was expecting. The moment Rocher's soaring snake moved, the supreme lords were left to ponder. Another sword beyond this universe had made an appearance. This meant that such a young warrior was likely to change the very fabric of the universe in the future. Nathan's eyes were brimming with worry as he watched the battle unfold. Since the opening of the illusion battlefield, this was the first time he had made such an expression. Rocher is indeed very strong. Lawson couldn't help but laugh grimly. You need to teach him a lesson. With his calm demeanor, Nathan replied, he has to defeat Zen before facing me. Humph, I doubt Zen would defeat Rocher anyway. The mere mention of Zen's name put Lawson in a bitter mood. With the strength Zen displayed against Shania, Lawson saw his strength in a whole new light. Of course, it wasn't just Lawson. The other tens of thousands of warriors outside the picture had the same mind on the matter. But Zen smashed Lawson into ashes in a single punch. Lawson couldn't help but feel sour every time he thought of this. After the battle ended, Kurt's figure appeared on the stone once again, with crossed knees and a calm look in his eyes. Rocher's terrifying display of strength indeed made his state of mind waver. At this moment, he was silently chanting a Buddhist scripture, holding back the power of the inner demon. He still needed to face his next opponent. Only by maintaining a calm state of mind would he be able to go any further. Not long after, the mysterious woman's voice resounded once again. According to the rules of the round-robin battle set by this woman, there were 3 battles left. First, it was Zen against Rocher, and then Nathan against Kurt. The victors of these 2 battles would then have to face each other. Zen versus Rocher. After the cold voice resounded, a warm smile surfaced on Rocher's face. Now, he knew what his mission was. The arrow of his destiny pierced through the universe, right into the divine land. In the universe, he had only one goal, to fight against Zen. Whoosh! With a flash of light on the stone, Rocher vanished from where he stood and appeared on the heaven-earth board. Soon after, Zen also stepped onto the board. And as Zen came into view, Rocher was filled with emotion. Zen had grown so fast in the past that Rocher could only look up to him. Now, he finally stood opposite Zen. And this time, Rocher had a 70% chance of winning this battle. All things considered, this was already an extremely high chance of winning. But Rocher didn't dare be the slightest bit careless. Zen's potential was terrifying in itself. Rocher was well aware that if he were to give his opponent a sliver of a chance, Zen would most likely turn the tides in his favor. For a moment, both of them were silent. Then, Zen smiled. "Draw your sword." To this, Rocher silently nodded his head. Then, the soaring snake was slowly unsheathed from its sheath. A brilliant silver light shone as a silver moon appeared in his hand. Meanwhile, Zen had also pulled out his Thunderwind Divine Sword. The weapons between the two were not equal by any means. The Thunderwind Divine Sword was a first-rank divine weapon. Even while it was considered one of the best first-rank divine weapons and was even listed on the Spirit Tablet, Rocher's sword was a treasure that went beyond the Spirit Tablet. There was an undeniable large gap between the two. But a sword did not make a swordsman. Believing this, Zen completely overlooked the fact. And so, the two swordsmen drew their weapons. Countless warriors in the universe had their eyes on them, holding their breath in anticipation. It was clear that an intense battle was about to unfold. No one wanted to miss a single moment. Rocher should win this. Zen's sword strike defeated Shania, so it's indeed extraordinary. But Rocher can dodge it with his speed. Yeah, I think so too. Rocher himself had judged that he had a 70% chance of claiming victory against Zen. And almost 99% of the onlookers believed that Rocher would win. During his fight against Qart, Rocher had managed to give a shocking display of strength. At this point, people had already neglected Nathan, who was supposedly the top godly genius. They were already inwardly assigning the title to Rocher. Nathan had the Xuanyuan clan, the strongest clan in the entire universe. It was even more powerful than the Hidden Spirit Temple. But one's family background wasn't the key point in determining their strength. Nathan might not be able to handle Rocher. Slightly wielding his soaring snake, Rocher made a ripple of light appear beneath his feet. This ripple of light circled him for a moment before following the board to where Zen stood. The moment it spread out, Rocher took a step forward. It seemed as though he was traveling through light. He moved with incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, Rocher was charging towards Zen. And this time, Zen didn't retreat. With a slight shake of the Thunderwind Divine Sword, Zen sent forth a series of Nether God shadows, which charged straight at Rocher. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The Nether God shadows were basically Zen's avatars as they used all sorts of fist moves against Rocher. Break. In the past, these Nether God shadows could create some trouble for the enemies. But in this situation, Rocher merely waved his hand and a faint ripple appeared in the space before him. The Nether God shadows advancing towards him were instantly shattered and dissipated. Crack, crack, crack. Following the Nether God shadows, countless rays of lightning like dragons appeared, ready to devour Rocher. In the face of these lightning bolts, Rocher didn't even bother to dodge them. Instead, with the momentum of a soaring dragon, he charged straight ahead. The soaring snake had already shot towards Zen. Cling. The two swords clashed. "You should probably use more power," Rocher stated calmly. Under this strike, a crack appeared on Zen's Thunderwind Divine Sword. In front of the soaring snake, a first-rank divine weapon was merely a toy. "I will." Zen's gaze turned extremely sharp. Piercing sword intent was shot out in the blink of an eye. God's intimidating strike. Zen struck out with the sword without hesitation. At this moment, the Thunderwind Divine Sword, wrapped in sword intent, had the strength to compete head-on with the soaring snake. But Rocher had only swung the sword abruptly, immediately blocking Zen's strike. Ever since Zen comprehended the god's intimidating strike, no one had been able to block him. It was too sharp, too cold-blooded. But Rocher did it like it was nothing. Clang. Following a crisp sound, Rocher took 3 steps back, a faint smile surfacing on his face. The emotion closing is a very powerful move, but this sword strike is far from enough, he said with a shake of his head. By relying on the god's intimidating strike alone, Zen perhaps wouldn't have even been able to deal with Qart, let alone Rocher. Then I'll just have to do it again. Turning slightly, the Thunderwind Divine Sword slashed down once more. But Rocher merely raised his hand and deflected the strike with ease. There were 2 swords against each other. Without attacking, Rocher had strong defense with his speed. No matter how exquisite or sharp Zen's sword strike was, Rocher's sword swiftly blocked it in the blink of an eye. Clank, 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 clank. Both of their feet were nailed firmly to the board. The two swords intersected with clear, melodious sounds. At this moment, neither of them used much strength. It was purely a game of technology. But as it was, Zen was always the attacker as Rocher was always on defense. In the beginning, every strike of Zen's sword had been completely countered by Rocher. Even after numerous strikes, Zen wasn't posing any threat. This outcome wasn't a surprise for many of the martial artists. While Zen's sword skill was indeed formidable, even he had a limit. No matter how profound his moves were, Rocher managed to block them instantly. But after Zen had made 100 attacks, the tables were somehow turned. Suddenly, Zen's long sword trembled and started drifting erratically. He was well aware that he couldn't deal with Rocher with his regular attacks. Rocher was too fast, after all. He could see through Zen's sword strikes and block them with ease. So Zen had no choice but to change his strategy. It was time for him to abandon his usual sword strikes. Chapter 1364, The Beginning Swordsmanship. Zen's no move was like a small snake that hovered in the air, poised to strike. After dodging Rocher's soaring snake, it lunged straight for his opponent's face. Facing this move, Rocher remained as indifferent as before. The soaring snake in his hand circled once, as 3 silver sword lights, like torrents of mercury, shot out from the wake he cut through the air. Ding, ding, ding. With 3 crisp ringing sounds, the 3 sword lights struck the body of the Thunderwind Divine Sword. It was like crushing a snake's head, one grinding step at a time. With every sword strike by the silver sword lights, the sword intent of the Thunderwind Divine Sword would weaken a bit. After 3 strikes, the sword intent that had originally been condensed on the blade's surface was forcibly dispersed by Rocher. Your sword moves do not offer you any advantage, Rocher said with an indifferent shrug. Zen's god's intimidating strike was indeed powerful, but Rocher's swordsmanship had proven to be even stronger. What he cultivated was the beginning swordsmanship created by the Lord of Weapons himself. In the universe, there were countless forms of swordsmanship. However, in the end, all these had evolved from the beginning swordsmanship, which was the source of all forms of swordsmanship. Whether it was speed or sword moves, Zen had been completely undone by Rocher. However, even though Rocher was clearly a superior swordsman, he did not let his guard down. He was convinced that it was impossible for Zen to be so weak. However, after suppressing Zen, Rocher gradually became emboldened, and his attacks increased in intensity, drawing power from his rising bravado. Splash! Accompanying the sound was a brilliant silver sword light. The soaring snake was once again released. The mercury-like sword light began to flicker again as Rocher stepped on the light once more. Clang! As the swords clashed together, the sounds of steel grinding together rang out. Chop! Slash! Stab! Tap! The beginning swordsmanship was very similar to the basic swordsmanship that Zen had mastered early on. Indeed, it could be said that it was the complete version of the basic swordsmanship. Combined with Rocher's innate speed, it appeared to be flawless. With Rocher now taking the initiative to attack, it was difficult for Zen to avoid his opponent's sword moves. He could only passively defend and was forced to dodge and retreat. However, Rocher's speed was so fast that he seemed to be dancing with a glittering bolt of lightning. When he had stepped on the light, Zen had already been surrounded by danger. Even after the 8 smoky melodies was activated, it was still proving difficult for him to dodge Rocher's attack. Strangely, Rocher didn't display any intention of ending this battle. Instead, he was extremely patient, and continued to wait. Ha ha, I said so. Zen is no match for Rocher. He simply doesn't have the strength or the skill to fight back. He lacks the advantage in sword moves, speed, and power. How could he be able to fight against Rocher? Fortunately, I bet on Rocher. I'm going to win a large fortune. What kind of swordsmanship is Rocher using? It appears to be exactly the same as the basic swordsmanship. Isn't Zen capable of the same? On the board, Zen only moved about within a space of 10 feet. However, Rocher was different. He was like a butterfly, rapidly flurrying back and forth. Occasionally, he would stab Zen with his sword. After pausing for a moment, he would then disappear. In the past, whenever Zen had faced off against an opponent, his speed had always lent him the advantage. But now, even though Zen had already activated his forceful energy and had used the 8 smoky melodies, he still wasn't able to follow his opponent's footsteps. He lagged behind, seeming almost lethargic when compared to Rocher. Against Rocher, Zen was indeed at a very obvious disadvantage. However, as Rocher's sword strikes came slashing down from overhead, Zen also entered into a state of enlightenment. Roché's swordsmanship. The moves of the beginning swordsmanship were extremely simple and matched well with Zen's basic swordsmanship. However, there was something in this beginning swordsmanship that Zen couldn't fully understand. The momentum contained in the movements was a force that exceeded the bounds of basic swordsmanship. If Zen's basic swordsmanship was rated as 1, then the beginning swordsmanship was a solid 0. It had come first and was a foundation that Zen lacked. It contained an extremely marvelous and fantastical momentum. It wasn't that Zen's perception had been lacking. After all, the momentum of the beginning swordsmanship had been accumulated by the Lord of Weapons. This swordsmanship was called the beginning swordsmanship, and it was the foundation of all forms of swordsmanship. In terms of moves, it was original and simply unbreakable. Ding! When Roché's sword came slashing down again, Zen used the same sword move. The actions of the two were practically the same, but Zen's sword attack was missing something vital. Regardless of whether it was the form, speed, or momentum, Zen's sword move remained inferior to Roché's. What exactly is missing? Zen wondered. He held his sword horizontally, poised in front of his chest, as he stared at Roché flying overhead. Roché circled around in the distance before he returned to his original position. This time, the soaring snake circled around his side and savagely hacked straight at Zen. Again, Zen also slashed out vertically with this sword. Clang! The blades of the two swords slipped away from each other as their paths crossed. However, in the moment that they met during the savage blow, a long and narrow gash appeared on Zen's body, forming a zigzag line down his side. As for Roché, he quickly moved out of range. You are unable to break my sword moves. The difference between us is too big. Roché held an overwhelming advantage, but he still addressed Zen with full respect. In his eyes, however, there was a faint trace of disappointment. He had always seen Zen as a true opponent. His strongest opponent. A few years ago, even if he were to run after Zen at full speed, he would not have been able to catch up to him. But in just 6 or 7 years, as he stood in front of Zen again, he found that he had already surpassed this goal. Roché did not like this feeling, and he felt cheated. Zen could clearly be stronger. Again, as he thought of this, a hint of frustration appeared in his eyes. With a thrust of his sword, he charged straight at Zen. Right at this moment, Zen once again mirrored the same sword move as Roché's. However, there was now something else in Zen's strike. Ding! After the two swords intersected, a look of surprise appeared on Roché's face as he looked at Zen. He stood rooted to the board as the beam of light beneath his feet slowly expanded. He had felt the momentum within Zen's sword strike. It was the momentum within the beginning swordsmanship. Even though it was still very insignificant, it was already in its infancy. Things are getting interesting. At this moment, Roché's eyes seemed to radiate with vigor and he smiled briefly. Beginning swordsmanship. In order to acquire this sword technique, he had spent nearly 3 years in extensive practice. It had been 3 years in the outside world. In truth, while in the treasure trove of the Lord of Weapons, Roché had been trapped there for 300 years. The time law there had been altered, and the flow of time there was now at a ratio of 100 to 1. As the 300 years had passed, he had repeatedly practiced the beginning swordsmanship, which was so similar to the basic swordsmanship, yet so significantly different. He had gained 10% of the momentum after he had practiced for almost 20 years. After another 80 years, he had gained 20%. After 150 years, 30%. Another 220 years, 40%. After a full 300 years, he had finally obtained 50% of the momentum of the beginning swordsmanship. Roché had invested a total of 300 years of his long life to master 50% of the beginning swordsmanship. But Zen had already gained 10% of its momentum, and it had happened in less than 5 minutes. Through watching and testing my swordsmanship, has Zen managed to comprehend the essence of the beginning swordsmanship. What a monster he is! Roché thought, with both awe and delight. Chapter 1365. Sharpen the sword skill. Roché looked incredulously at the scene playing out in front of him. He found it hard to accept his own speculations about it. He believed that Zen was very talented and would be slightly stronger than him, but he didn't expect the gap between him and Zen to be so great. He had tried his best to comprehend and cultivate the beginning swordsmanship for 20 years before he finally began to grasp a little bit of it. However, Zen, too, had grasped it a little bit after only exchanging a few sword strikes with him. Roché naturally didn't know that as Zen kept on comprehending, he had taken the simplest sword skill as his foundation and gradually progressed from there. And the sword skill contained in the god's intimidating strike had the same origins as that of the beginning swordsmanship. As Zen and Rocher fought each other, their strikes formed a complementary momentum, and Zen gradually comprehended the momentum contained within the beginning swordsmanship. Since you intend to gain comprehension, I will share this opportunity with you. In terms of moves, Rocher already had the upper hand with his superior swordsmanship. This formidable swordsmanship was created not long after the world formed and developed among the primordial chaos. It was the foundation of all the sword skills between heaven and earth. Following this, numerous kinds of sword skills developed based on the primary one and spread everywhere. Although Zen's sword skill was extremely simple, it had lost its momentum. Rocher regarded Zen as his greatest opponent, and rightly so. However, during the skirmish, he didn't care about the fact that Zen comprehended the beginning swordsmanship. His attacks were as sharp and aggressive as ever. However, his speed had slowed down by 60% and his strength had decreased by a whopping 30%. At this point, the purpose of the battle was not competing on sword moves, but rather gaining comprehension together by sparring with each other. When Zen realized Rocher's motivation, a peculiar look appeared in his eyes. This was not to say that Rocher would definitely win if he had the advantage in moves. But Rocher was a stickler for rules. He held an advantage in sword moves, but refused to use this advantage to break through. He was a true gentleman in that sense. This was Rocher's principle and way of cultivation, and he stood up for his principles. He had a good sense of right and wrong and was in favor of playing fairly. What for goodness sake are these two doing? Their attacks have suddenly slowed down. It seems like neither of them has any intention of winning. Are they here just to practice the sword skills together? Their swordsmanship is so exquisite. The onlookers were quite confused. Anyone would put up their best fight on the heaven-earth board. The more battles they won, the more power they would gain. All the warriors fought for high rankings in the world of chaos. The higher the rankings they obtained, the greater their chances would improve in the future. Everyone was scratching their heads wondering why Rocher and Zen were just practicing the sword skills together during a competition. Just what are they doing? Xenia asked in a daze. Her state of mind wasn't affected when she was kicked out of the competition by Rocher. On the contrary, she admired him. If my guess is right, the swordsmanship that Rocher has cultivated is also incomplete. This sword technique is also very weird. After the sword strike becomes the simplest one, it has the momentum of a divine weapon. A supreme lord from the celestial position explained flatly. What's terrifying is that Zen has actually grasped this kind of momentum not long after fighting with Rocher. He has comprehended it himself. Haha, this sort of talent can't even be described as terrifying. After all, this guy has obtained the golden celestial position title. However, this guy doesn't seem to be very obedient. The head of our race asked Zen to meet him, but he hasn't gone to meet him in the past few years, another supreme lord from the celestial position remarked coldly. After staring at Zen for a while, the supreme lord, who made the earlier comments, nodded and replied, I think Rocher has also encountered a bottleneck in his swordsmanship. He exchanges sword moves with Zen just to impart his own swordsmanship to Zen. After that, he will try to make a breakthrough by taking advantage of Zen's cultivation. This Supreme Lord was indeed so prodigious that he was capable of seeing through Rocher's thoughts even when he was unable to figure out the origins of the beginning swordsmanship. Other than trying to pursue the balance, Rocher indeed had this exact same thought in his mind. Up till now, he had only practiced the beginning swordsmanship with limited success and acquired 50% of the momentum within the sword strike. It would be difficult for him to achieve a breakthrough again. The only thing that supported this sword technique was a piece of bright jade. If it was stimulated with life vitality, there would be a tall and sturdy virtual figure, which would pick up a sword and practice the sword skill. For the past 300 years, it would appear once in the morning and once in the evening. Each time, it only stayed for 30 seconds. Rocher was comprehending the sword skill purely through observation. He followed suit after watching the figure demonstrate the swordplay. Given the extremely short period of time, he was unable to find someone with whom to exchange sword moves during the cultivation. Rocher's sword skill still needed to be honed, just like a good saber, which needed to be sharpened on a whetstone. But he had been unable to find such a whetstone on which to sharpen his skills. It was impossible for him to find it in the lower world or in the universe. If Zen was able to grasp a bit of the momentum of the beginning swordsmanship, then Rocher would use him to sharpen his swordsmanship. Of course, fencing had always been about polishing each other's skills. In this exchange, the benefits to Zen were also obvious. What astonished Rocher the most was that Zen was able to comprehend 20 to 30% of the beginning swordsmanship in such a short span of time. Rocher didn't have this idea from the start. However, after they had fought for a short while, Zen had begun to master the swordsmanship. This fueled Rocher's confidence that he could take advantage of Zen to sharpen his own skills. He did not care about how Zen would make it, he only knew that his idea was feasible. Ding, clang, ping. The two of them seemed to be the beginners and had just learned the basics of swordsmanship. They skillfully swung the swords using different sword plays, such as stab sword, circle parry, withdraw sword and raise sword. Those warriors, who could detect the momentum within, watched them with great fascination. This sort of momentum seemed to be similar to the ordinary ones. But if one were to carefully think about it, it would truly be thrilling. However, there were many warriors in this universe who were completely confused judging by the puzzled expressions on their faces. Are these two crazy? Even children know this basic sword technique. Isn't this a colossal waste of time? 15 minutes have already passed, but they are still. Thankfully, there seemed to be no time limit on the heaven-earth board. The godly geniuses were surprisingly patient as well, and no one urged Rocher and Zen on. As he continued to spar with Rocher, Zen's understanding of the sword techniques became clearer and clearer. It was as if his proficiency over the sword had elevated to a higher level. Clang, he lifted his sword and stabbed Rocher with it. The momentum of the beginning swordsmanship had increased by leaps and bounds. He has already comprehended 30%. That was fast. Rocher was slightly startled. He was already familiar with this skill. His sword was raised a bit and deflected Zen's sword. How long would it take Zen to master 50% of the sword skill like me? His eyes gleamed with anticipation. The number of sword moves the two warriors had exchanged had already reached 3,000. Both Zen and Rocher were high on energy at this moment, and neither seemed tired or ready to give up. With every thrust of his sword, Zen was grasping more and more comprehension. This opportunity for a miraculous enlightenment such as this was not something most people would encounter in their entire lives. 30%, 40%, 50%. When Zen had comprehended 50% of the beginning swordsmanship aided by Rocher's demonstration, it was considered small success. In the past, Rocher had cultivated the sword skill for 300 years, though it was only 3 years to the outside world. Compared to Rocher's cultivation speed, Zen's was innumerably faster. Talent was just one of the factors, but the main reason why Zen could master the sword skill so fast was that the beginning swordsmanship was compatible with Zen's sword technique. Rather, it was almost exactly the same. He just simplified every complicated move. Woo! Ever since Zen had mastered 50% of the beginning swordsmanship, his sword began to resonate with this sharp sound. An invisible aura spread out in all directions, filling the entire heaven-earth board. The warriors outside of the painting could hear the sound, but they couldn't see nor feel its aura. However, the other 8 warriors on the stones of the heaven-earth board seemed to have fallen into an illusion created among the chaos. The oppressive aura was not strong, but it gave Nathan and the others a wondrous experience. Not only was the aura grand and imposing, but it also broadened their perceptions. What has this guy comprehended? His aura is so overbearing. Lawson spat indignantly. He was influenced by Zen even when he was standing on a stone. He was irked by this. Surely, he must have made a breakthrough on the sword skill. Nathan said with a frown. Before that aura spread, Rocher had already retreated several hundred feet back. He cupped his hands and yelled at Zen, "Congratulations." "Thank you." Zen nodded, quietly feeling the wonderful momentum humming. "You're welcome. I did it all for myself." Rocher smiled faintly as he raised his sword. He knew very well that if there was no shield in this world that could block the sword, then the sword might be useless. Chapter 1366, The Scattered Stones. The sparring match between Zen and Rocher did not stop there. In this universe, there were myriad different ways of martial arts cultivation. And it all began first with what was called the self-enlightenment. The living creatures of this universe created and developed all of the cultivation methods. The methods of cultivation of the same range all had a common origin. And later on, this was further divided into different branches. The original cultivation method was derived from warriors' self-enlightenment. After the self-enlightenment method, the second way of cultivation was to receive an education. Some warriors generously imparted all of their martial arts comprehension to their disciples. And like a chain effect, these disciples then unselfishly spread out such precious knowledge to more people from generation to generation. For this reason, the emergence and establishment of sects and sacred places flourished. With cultivation based on the achievements of ancestors, this was a top-down approach. It was more often than not a way of refinement for all living creatures, as it was more widespread. Then practice and training came third after the first two methods. Now, this marked the onset of warriors' epiphany. Through engaging themselves in actual combat, warriors could further assess what they had learned. It was also the best way of resolving doubts or gaining new enlightenment. Those who had epiphanies or revelations during a fight would always benefit a lot. This kind of comprehension through practice and training was also a sort of self-enlightenment. Rocher could obtain no more comprehension by merely studying the beginning swordsmanship. He could only improve through practice and training. However, after he had ascended to the upper world, he found out that most kinds of swordsmanship in the universe were crude and inferior compared to the beginning swordsmanship. Perhaps there were some excellent sword techniques in several particular places of the universe, but it was such a pity that he could not visit them freely. For example, the sword chamber, the killing sword mountain, and the sword washing pool. After reaching the Soul Sea realm, Rocher still didn't display too much of his great sword skill in the 10th grade sacred place he lived. He was afraid that the mighty warriors in that place would covet the extraordinary cultivation method he had discovered, and he would probably be in great trouble. But in the illusion battlefield, his reputation had quickly spread throughout the entire universe. He could spar with Zen with no more worries now. At the very outset, Zen's sword skill was primarily inferior to his. He graciously offered to help him hone his skill. And currently, Zen's swordsmanship had improved so quickly that he already caught up with Rocher. They incessantly continued to exchange slashes, hacking, chopping, and stabbing at each other. Those warriors, who happened to have a strong knowledge of swords, watched the fight with great interest. They desired to comprehend something from the mysterious momentum of the two swords because they all knew they would benefit a lot by reading the way those two swords moved. On the contrary, those who didn't understand swords felt it was such a boring fight. They couldn't tell what was going on at all. Thus, a strange situational event occurred in the universe. The warriors with lower-based cultivation and with poor perceptions all felt sleepy and bored as they watched the sparring in the picture above their illusion spaces. From time to time, a round of angry curses for the two fighters could be heard, blaming the two for their boring fight. As for those with higher-based cultivation, they intently stared at the two figures with bright eyes, too afraid that they would miss even the slightest of the whole fight. They even mentally repeated and imitated the moves as they watched closely and excitedly outside the illusion battlefield. 1 hour passed. Then 2 hours, then 4 hours. Then a brilliant light suddenly flickered in Rocher's eyes like a bright star. Soon, an invisible momentum began to spiral around him. The tremendous flow of energy known as momentum didn't break the heaven-earth board under his feet or didn't even bring about a light breeze. But surprisingly, over 100 stones on the heaven-earth board were pushed away by the momentum and scattered away from their original positions. The stones are moved by his power. What does that mean? Those stones were stationary even when the entire heaven-earth board broke. How come his momentum can shift them? Although it would be exaggerating to say that a fight between Soul Sea realm warriors had the power to annihilate the world, but at the very least, it could destroy mountains and rivers. This heaven-earth board, which was 1 million feet long and 1 million feet wide, had already been destroyed several times by these warriors during their fights. Like for example, the hit of Kurt's 9-ring staff, and Lucille's stamp with her tiptoes. At any rate, none of the warriors had been able to affect these stones. They had remained where the mysterious woman had arranged them. They had never moved from their spots, nor had they been harmed by any attacks. But now, Rocher's momentum managed to move them. Because of this disturbance, the calculations about the future, which were confirmed earlier, would also change dramatically. Many people fixated their gaze on the heaven-earth board and observed the new situation unfolded. Immediately, their faces all darkened. The white stones, which had been tight in defense, now had a big loophole in their territory. On the other hand, a group of black stones invaded the white stones' territory. This is a very dangerous circumstance. Nathan's eyes narrowed in astonishment. What will happen? Lawson tilted his head and asked. Nathan had a solemn expression on his face as he continued to calculate. His calculation was even quite faster than some supreme lords. The white side will lose. I wonder if that woman will reset the scattered stones. Nathan finished his words, and then he looked up at the sky. This game of Go had all been played by the mysterious woman alone. She could definitely move all the stones on the heaven-earth board if she wanted. Since Rocher's power scattered some of the stones, and it was a move not made by her, she had all the reason now to reset them. But after a while, Nathan still didn't see the woman reach out her hand. He dropped his gaze and shook his head. The mysterious woman hadn't shown much skill and had made the moves quite casually. Nathan speculated that she had played the game intuitively. This natural way of calculating the future was the most accurate. Thus, it was unlikely that she would reset the stones scattered by Roche and return them to their original positions. What a pity, Nathan let out a sigh. Perhaps he was the most reluctant one to see this new drastic change. According to his calculation of the previous situation on the board, he would become the only dominator of the future, and nobody would be able to fight him. If things went that way, no matter how masterfully talented Zen and Roche were, they would all become insignificant characters in the end. For that sole reason, Nathan felt not worried even if he had witnessed their outstanding talents. Though he might lose to either of them here, he knew that the odds would finally be in his favor. However, Roche's move had significantly changed everything. And even his fate had been profoundly affected. This enigma prompted Nathan to hope that the mysterious woman would reset the stones. Unfortunately, she didn't show that intention at all, or perhaps she refused even to entertain such a notion. I didn't expect that he would even move the stones. That sword, built by Chiyu, is really overbearing. How did it suddenly appear in the universe after being hidden for so many years? The mysterious woman stared at the board and muttered, "This is a disaster that will destroy the entire world. By all means, if I reset the stones forcefully, I'm afraid that this game of Go will lose its meaning, and the calculation of the future will be inaccurate." With this new situation, all the Supreme Lords also became despondent and looked pessimistic. The sudden change on the Heaven-Earth board posed threats not limited to the godly geniuses but also all races. It was a gloomy and hopeless situation that no one could deal with and change. There shouldn't be such a great crisis even if it's a world of chaos. Why would things become so desperate? Roche is the bane of all living beings. This is the fate of our universe. Trillions of lives will all be doomed. The hand-wringing cries of the Supreme Lords reverberated around the universe. Everyone was overwrought. However, the despairing event on the Heaven-Earth board only lasted for half a minute. Much to everyone's surprise, a momentum also emanated from Zen's body. It was almost exactly as powerful as that of Roche some moments ago. As it spread out immensely, it once again scattered the stones on the board. Not a single stone left in the 1,000-foot radius around Zen. The situation on the board had once again drastically shifted in such a short time. The situation on the board changed again. There is a way out for the white side. Ha, when God closes a door, he always opens a window. You were right, it's a good move. Many white stones had displaced from their spots, which had changed the whole situation. Although the current situation on the board was still complicated, the black side was also in great danger now. All the spectators could imagine that the succeeding 2 or 3 moves would eventually decide the final result of the game. Anyway, everyone felt it was so much better now. There was still hope, after all. Nathan's expression also visibly relaxed when he noticed this new situation. This circumstance indicated that he would still play a significant role in the future. Although it was worse than the original situation, it was much better than the one caused by Roche. Does this mean that Zen has helped me? He wondered. At this moment, his calculation involved not only the situation on the Heaven-Earth board but also included Zen and Roche as well. They had directly moved the stones on the board, so they should also be regarded as one of the deciding factors, as it also showed that they could interfere with their fates. Even though Nathan unwillingly came up with such a conclusion, he had calculated that it would be more or less the case. So far, Zen and Roche both improved and boosted their comprehension of the beginning swordsmanship to more than 50%. Roche tightly gripped the sword named Soaring Snake in his hand as his face revealed a look of relief. He had failed to make any improvement for quite a long time. To think of a way to break through his bottleneck, he had been on pins and needles day and night. Thanks to Zen, he finally inched a step forward. Now is the time, let's go on, Zen, Roche said, beaming with a small smile. They had both managed to achieve a new upswing development, and their sword skill was currently at the same level. Now was the perfect time for them to decide the result of this fight. Zen nodded slightly in response. Under the influence of the momentum he had just comprehended, Zen felt as if his mind had left his body, and was tossed up in the air. It was a surreal feeling as if he was in a brand new world. Alright, let's continue. Zen looked calm on the surface, but a storm was rising inside his chaotic sea. A large flow of chaotic energy surged like a tornado as it was drawn out of his chaotic sea and circulated violently inside his body. Chapter 1367, It was delicious. Only the tiniest droplet of sweat rolled down Roche's temple as he didn't fully exert himself in this fight with Zen. Besides, he had deliberately imparted the beginning swordsmanship to Zen by this sparring session with him. Perhaps Zen wouldn't be at a disadvantage if he were to spar with Roche using the sword strikes. However, that was Rocher's own way of cultivation, not his. If he wanted to win the fight, he needed to use his own strengths. He drew out the chaotic energy, which welled up together like clumps of ink and coiled around Zen's meridians. Then, it flowed towards Zen's right arm. Zen had now controlled the previously overwrought and fidgety sword intent and fixed it firmly on the sword blade. The sword blade emitted a golden light, which was quickly covered by the gray light. The two light beams mixed together looked like a ray of fireflies in the night sky. The weapons weren't that important during the fight. The soaring snake was indeed powerful, but the Thunderwind Divine Sword could also be considered a supreme chaotic weapon after it was mixed with the chaotic energy. The true competition was between their respective actual strengths. They've finally begun to fight. I've already cultivated for one lap, but their fight's only starting now. These two are really so slow in battling. Rocher, come on, please try your best to win this time. I bet everything on you. When Rocher previously saw Zen prepare for the battle, there was a gentle smile on his face. The soaring snake quickly rose up to the side of Rocher's face. Even though you have comprehended the emotion-closing godly way, it is still not enough. It is far from enough. Rocher shook his head. It was known that there were many different types of destinies in this era. Almost everyone knew that Yan was the one who Zen kept looking for. She was the North Star that hung in the northern sky region. The North Star could give direction and guide people to prevent them from getting lost. It pointed towards the right direction with the brightest illumination. Yan was a star that flickered only for Zen, and guided him all the way to the divine land. At that moment, Rocher suddenly had a dawning realization. He believed that his fight with Zen would be very intense. The battle between them might not be limited to this time. They might fight again soon even in the divine land. Still, that was just Rocher's prediction, and he clearly wasn't sure of something that hadn't happened yet. But if nothing unexpected happened in this battle, then Rocher would definitely win. Whoosh! Rocher brandished the soaring snake and a wave of light suddenly spread out. His feet glided on the light beam which enabled him to move extremely fast. It was true that Zen's chaotic god's intimidating strike was truly formidable. However, Rocher wasn't afraid of it even in the slightest. While the sword attack was indeed powerful, it wouldn't be effective if it failed to hit him. Rocher's lightning speed gave Zen enough reasons to be worried. Rocher's effortless movements were too fast. The chaotic god's intimidating strike was condensed in the sword, but Rocher's body was like a ray of light which constantly traveled back and forth on the heaven-earth board. Zen had a hard time figuring out his accurate position. Despite that, Zen didn't hesitate at all. He left the board as well, while the Thunderwind Divine Sword appeared by his side as it approached Rocher. Whoosh! The two battling figures crossed each other and were only 3 feet away from each other. Now is the time. Chaotic God's intimidating strike. Stab! Crazy as it might seem, Zen had learned the move on the spot. The sword in Zen's hand emitted a sharp, long ray of light which quickly pierced Rocher. The light also contained a majestic momentum, which made its golden-gray luster quite eye-catching. The sharp light beam elongated even further and looked like it was about to pierce through everything that was in its way. However, something strange happened. Rocher's figure stopped and leaned aside at a certain angle the moment he passed by. That pause did not even influence his physical body's movement. It did, however, allow the sword ray to pass by Rocher's side. Just a hair's breadth away. But it was not dangerous. He could dodge the ray at a farther distance if he wanted to, but Rocher didn't do so on purpose. He just felt that straying away more was unnecessary. Again, meanwhile, Zen did not stop and the chaotic energy within his body rose ceaselessly. On the other hand, the chaotic sea in his body continued to shrink at a high rate. It was also at that moment that the world tree appeared in Zen's inner world. More time passed and it continued to grow and flourish with vigor. There was a fierce glint in Zen's eyes as he did his first slashing motion, which already consumed 10% of his chaotic energy. He slashed again for the second time, and drew out even more chaotic energy. By the time he had drawn out 40%, the entire chaotic sea had been reduced by half. Zen's plan was to seal off Rocher's escape route by the second time he swung his sword. As a result, he slashed out 4 times in a row. 3 sword strikes had cut off Rocher's path and stopped him from escaping, while 1 sword strike was aimed straight at him. That one strike contained the boundless momentum, which turned the clouds into a shade of gold. 4 sword strikes were quickly released. The sword intent and life vitality formed from the chaotic energy flooded the entire heaven-earth board like a surging tide. Splash! Rocher won't be able to escape. Zen's sword strike is too powerful. If Rocher can't escape, he'll be killed. Sadly, Rocher was too careless. He should have used his stronger methods to kill Zen at the beginning. Look at where he is now. The crowd of spectators erupted into a noisy chatter at the bottle's current situation. However, they didn't notice that the soaring snake in Rocher's hand began to throb slightly. Soon enough, waves began to spread around Rocher and envelope him. He faced Zen's 4 sword strikes head-on without any trace of fear on his face. What he had comprehended had already surpassed the godly way. Thus, he clearly knew that the god's intimidating strike which Zen had mastered wasn't actually the real god's intimidating strike. The waves spread out in all directions while surrounding Rocher. A small crack appeared on the heaven-earth board after the waves had covered it, which grew bigger until the board shattered. The waves continued to fan out and spread in the air before they finally landed on Rocher's sword. The 4 sword strikes Zen had unleashed fused with half of his chaotic energy and were his most powerful trump cards. Even then, Rocher still looked indifferent as before. When Zen launched his sword attack, Rocher already had a plan on how to deal with him. But just as Rocher was preparing to defend against Zen's sword strikes, the soaring snake suddenly vibrated. Rocher suddenly looked troubled. Perhaps the soaring snake had been starved for too long. It was already quite irritable and almost broke the sword sheath before. It even wanted to swallow the otherworldly swordsman's sword back then. Rocher had managed to calm it down, but not without great difficulty. However, the sword was about to burst now. This time, its target was Zen's sword. The Thunderwind Divine Sword could be considered a good sword in the universe, but it was still inferior to a supreme divine weapon. But since Zen had drawn out a massive amount of chaotic energy and fused it with the sword released an aura that was quite similar to that of a supreme chaotic weapon. Rocher's sword then felt that this supreme chaotic weapon was even more delicious than the otherworldly swordsman's sword. Chapter 1368, Accident. The soaring snake continued to tremble as the waves weaved themselves into snake scales that emitted light. More and more snake scales appeared, and they soon formed one giant snake with a single horn, the soaring snake. The soaring snake had a brilliantly red body with 2 wings, and a single horn on its forehead. Legend said that once it shed its horn, it would become a dragon. It was also said that there were no dragons in the world, and the first dragon that ever appeared had evolved from a soaring snake. Hiss. Rocher struggled, but he couldn't control the soaring snake because it had shown up on its own. The soaring snake was currently 20 feet long. It spread out its wings and charged towards Zen. It wasn't interested in eating Zen, but rather the powerful weapon he held in his hand. The soaring snake liked supreme primordial weapons the most, but found supreme chaotic weapons appetizing as well. Had the snake been a live soaring snake, to devour a supreme chaotic weapon would have been fatal. After all, chaotic energy was deadly for a soaring snake. However, this soaring snake had already fused with the soaring snake sword. It was now a weapon spirit, so it didn't have to worry about its health. Despite the soaring snake's length, it moved extremely fast. Its thin tail swayed slightly in the air as it faced the 4 streaks of sword light Zen had launched. When the soaring snake attacked, Zen's golden sword light streaks were instantly broken. The soaring snake's shadow passed by in front of Zen, and before he could react, he felt that something had touched his hand. He looked at his palm, and the Thunderwind Divine Sword had disappeared. His eyes quickly averted to the soaring snake, which had his Thunderwind Divine Sword in its clutches. The soaring snake suddenly raised its head and threw the sword into the air. The Thunderwind Divine Sword circled in the air and fell downward. In the next moment, the soaring snake opened its mouth and ate the sword. Hiss. The soaring snake hissed above the edge of the heaven-earth board before it flew back to Rocher in a flash. It moved gracefully and unbelievably swift despite its weight. Now, that was the real, approaching without casting a shadow and leaving without a trace. The snake was truly dangerous. Even the supreme lords in the universe couldn't help but look at it with trepidation. Naturally, many people began to desire the soaring snake sword after Rocher's display. There was no doubt that the 4 clans wanted to recruit Rocher in order to consolidate their clans, power and fortune in the future. However, the others had different ideas. Some people had found that there was a great chance that Rocher's fortune might be related to this sword. Such a weapon was definitely a powerful one which surpassed all the weapons in the spirit tablet. In fact, it was much more precious than the supreme divine weapons in the universe. While the soaring snake looked small and ordinary that many warriors at the lower realms couldn't feel its momentum, the supreme lords could feel it emit a deterrent force, which they perceived as a mortal threat to them. The mysterious girl who sat on the staircase in the palace amidst the thick clouds stretched out 2 fingers and crossed them. She then observed the soaring snake through the gap between her fingers. How would this snake appear? This can be considered as breaking the rules, right? The first rule of the illusion battlefield was to fight with one's own power. However, different warriors used different methods. Some warriors were good at manipulating beasts, some mainly cultivated spirits. But those things were not allowed to be taken into the battlefield. Though it was unfair to some warriors, the rule had already been set up. It meant to be not able to take everyone into consideration. Nevertheless, there were always warriors knowing how to circumvent the rules. For example, Lone had succeeded in making his sword slip into the illusion battlefield. It was a bit similar to how she couldn't stop Rocher from taking his soaring snake sword into the battlefield, even if she knew about it. It wouldn't have been a big deal if the soaring snake stayed in the sword quietly. However, it suddenly showed up and devoured Zen's sword. Therefore, the girl wondered if she should intervene or not. Meanwhile, Zen dumbfoundedly stared at his empty hands with astonishment. How could he suddenly bring out a snake? How did it eat my sword in just 1 second? Zen thought with a bitter smile. There was a slight squelching sound as the soaring snake tried to swallow the Thunderwind Divine Sword. However, it failed to do so, then it abruptly twisted its body as its wings began to shake. While the soaring snake writhed about, it quickly opened its mouth and spat the sword out. The Thunderwind Divine Sword was broken into pieces. The soaring snake violently choked out the pieces which punctured the heaven-earth board like nails. The snake's face twisted into disgust as it stared hotly at Zen. Then, it turned into waves and dissipated as it finally returned to Rocher's sword. What? Zen was dumbfounded and did not know what to say. On the other hand, Rocher just stood there awkwardly with an apologetic look on his face. He knew that the soaring snake did so because it despised Zen's sword. This Thunderwind Divine Sword was not a supreme chaotic weapon. It was just a first-rank divine weapon. However, Zen had used the chaotic energy to launch the chaotic god's intimidating strike. Therefore, the soaring snake had mistaken his sword for a supreme chaotic weapon. The chaotic energy Zen had poured into the sword had been consumed after he launched 4 strikes, so the snake found that something was wrong with the sword as it chewed it. The soaring snake liked to devour powerful weapons, but it didn't find first-rank divine weapons in the universe to be powerful enough. It was why the soaring snake had acted like that. All the warriors who watched the scene were utterly shocked as well. I am so sorry, Rocher apologized sincerely. Zen shrugged his shoulders and did not say a word. The damaged Thunderwind Divine Sword wasn't a big deal since they were currently in the illusion battlefield, which meant that the sword wasn't actually broken. It was just that Zen didn't have another proper weapon. It looked like he had to make do with the saint-killing spear. However, he was still hesitant. I have a second-rank divine weapon. Would you like to use it? Rocher asked. Rocher seemed to have felt Zen's embarrassment, so he offered his opponent a cyan gray sword. He had gotten the second-rank divine weapon as a reward in the 10th grade sacred place. Many warriors in the sacred place had been envious of him during that time when he had claimed his reward, because his cultivation was only on the same level as that of a newly ascended warrior. It wasn't until now did they realize that Rocher didn't consider his second-rank divine weapon as something rare. All right, Zen said as he nodded his head. He then reached out his hand and was ready to take the sword. At that moment, Lone stood still on the stone. His eyes flashed as he communicated with his own broken sword. This was a great chance for him and his damaged weapon. He and his sword knew that Zen possessed the chaotic energy, but they didn't know where he had gotten it. Lone originally wanted to find Zen and ask him to nourish his broken sword after the end of the illusion battlefield. The chaotic energy was highly necessary for the sword to be fixed. Thus, he wanted to seize this chance for his sword. Wait, he shouted. Zen looked up in confusion. This is an important battle. It is unfair for you to use a second-rank divine weapon, Lone said with a smile as he raised his sword and threw it towards Zen. Whoosh! The board usually had a constraining force around it which prevented warriors from leaving. However, the force had suddenly disappeared. The broken sword flew towards Zen and landed beside him with a metallic clang. Although the sword had been damaged, it still emitted a strong sense of tenacity. Zen knew that this sword was extraordinary and thought that it might be good for him if he used it. The moment the sword was thrust into the board, Rocher's soaring snake sword began to vibrate once again. The soaring snake seemed to smell the fragrance of a powerful weapon and wanted to get out from Rocher's sword. Unfortunately for the soaring snake, Rocher wouldn't allow it to happen again. He firmly pressed his thumb on the edge of the soaring snake sword's blade. The sword's extremely sharp blade glinted under the light. Of course, it cut the skin of Rocher's thumb. Rocher then used his thumb as a pen and wrote blood runes on the soaring snake sword's blade. His weapon stopped vibrating. No wonder I had to learn the blood seal skill when I got this sword. This soaring snake is really active and annoying, Rocher murmured. He looked up at Zen once more, a smile on his face. Had someone else been faced against Zen, the one might have continued to attack Zen and win the battle after the soaring snake broke Zen's sword. However, Rocher wouldn't do such a thing even if he fought an ordinary warrior, not to mention that Zen was the one who stood in front of him right now. Chapter 1369, A Big Gap. In this world, some people were purely opponents, while others were both friends and opponents. Zen was one of the latter, and Rocher was clear on this point. Zen looked at the broken sword beside him. The color of the sword was dim, and its body was somewhat broken. It now looked like an ordinary metal sword. The otherworldly swordsman had used it many times. In this fight, it would also be a useful weapon for Zen. Taking a step forward, he firmly grasped the sword in his hand. The moment he touched the broken sword, he felt a strange thought connect with him through the blade. The thought strikingly did not convey any particular message, as it merely made Zen feel rather friendly. And this denoted that the sword had an undeniably strong sword spirit. Zen had only temporarily activated the sword, and the sword spirit hadn't proactively communicated with him. They had come to a tacit understanding and were cooperating only for now. When he raised the sword, he realized that he seemed to be holding a feather. It was so light against his grip as if he was holding nothing. Explicitly, Zen was not used to such a light sword. No one would be willing to take a feather-like weapon to fight the enemy. Zen felt an unexpected emotion that suddenly took him by surprise. There was an exceedingly comfortable and heavy feeling transmitted from his hand as he waved his sword once, in a circular motion. How clever! It turned out that the sword would adjust its weight according to Zen's movements. After waving his sword for a while, Zen held it horizontally and nodded towards Rocher. He had learned a lot from this battle with Rocher and gained new insights into his swordsmanship. However, this did not mean that he would lose to Rocher. Rocher faintly smiled as the soaring snake sword rose once again. And the white light that became visible under his feet was like mercury, spreading out in all directions. The light quickly spread all the way down, covering the cross point in the middle of heaven-earth board, the many stones on it, the entire board, and finally, Zen's feet. It was clear as water that the imposing aura emitted from Rocher's body was undoubtedly incomparable. The Justice Godly Way was about a type of supreme faith. Although Karl had already stepped into the godly way, he had gone off course. Thus, his sense of justice was quite bigoted. Most people thought that he had been insane. The sword stood right in front of Rocher's face, and his eyes flashed with searing light. Everyone could perceive that Rocher was going to end this battle. He had held the advantage right from the very beginning. Consequently, all the people in the universe, including many world lords and supreme lords, thought and somehow expected that he would win. Zen merely took a deep breath. Then the chaotic energy in his body surged out and began to gather in his right arm, fluidly spreading to the broken sword. Pure chaotic energy. The sword spirit within the sword was extremely excited. Previously, it was only wondering how Zen could unleash that kind of chaotic energy. But now, the sword spirit fully understood that this fellow genuinely possessed chaotic energy. While the incomparably pure chaotic energy was overflowing and soaking into the sword spirit was absorbing it with great restraint. Zen had also felt the change in the sword when a portion of its chaotic energy seemed to be stolen. But then he realized that it was only a tiny fraction after he had just poured his chaotic energy into the sword. The amount was less than 1/10,000th of his chaotic C, so he didn't care at all. On the other hand, the sword spirit was different. In the beginning, it extremely restrained itself in absorbing the chaotic energy needed to nourish its body. It was not a duplicate in the illusion space, but a true creature in the illusion battlefield, so the nourishment was of great benefit to it. It felt that even if Zen possessed chaotic energy, he didn't have that much, so it restrained itself. But then, the sword spirit was stunned. Unexpectedly, the amount of chaotic energy that emerged from Zen's body had exceeded the sword spirit's imagination. How did this fellow do it? Wondered the sword spirit. Zen suddenly lifted his sword, his feet arched and his gaze cold. He also knew that it was high time for the victor to be decided. Although Zen exuded confidence in himself, he realized that there was indeed an enormous gap between him and his opponent. Rocher had only cultivated for a few years before he followed Zen all the way and even surpassed him. Even Zen had to admire him for that. Bearing this clear understanding in his mind, Zen would not readily admit defeat. Boom! Let's do it again. The chaotic god's intimidating strike. Sensing the direction in which Zen's sword was dancing, the sword spirit that was immersed in the chaotic energy tried its best to coordinate with Zen. It was a supreme chaotic weapon in the first place. And Zen skillfully learned to use the metal law to bear the chaotic energy from it. With their full cooperation, the sword spirit could take advantage of the situation and unleash an even more powerful strength. The streaks of golden light turned into golden lotuses that radiated strands after strands of gray light. This strike was far more dazzling than the previous one. Lone kept silent the whole time. He felt disturbed as he watched Zen unleash that broken sword's power. However, he had lent it to Zen on his own accord because it was for the sake of his beloved sword. "Come on," Rocher urged, smiling faintly. "It's the most suitable place to end our fight here." Rocher had firmly made up his mind to win this battle. As he lifted the soaring snake sword, layers upon layers of rhombic internal momentum began to interweave. Like sparkling and translucent gems, they exuded a pure and flawless luster. They were densely packed together, occupying all the space around Rocher. And all that was left was a path. Following that path, Rocher raised his sword, took a step, and sprinted. It was as though a dragon from the depths of the abyss had abruptly emerged from a path within the canyon. The silver light on the surface of his sword radiated another layer of internal momentum. The astonishing, powerful aura left the audience shocked beyond comparison. Whoosh! Rocher rushed straight towards Zen and the chaotic god's intimidating strike that the latter had thrust out with utmost urgency as if he was getting impatient to win this battle over. Dodging was even out of his option, but instead, he charged headlong against Zen's attack. That extremely sharp golden gray sword light pierced towards Rocher and passed through the perfectly straight soaring snake sword. Buzz! An ear-piercing howl echoed out. That sword light was cut in half by the bright silver light in Rocher's hand. Everyone mused that Rocher coped with the enemy head-on. What a strong method! Rocher is terrifyingly powerful. The power of Zen's sword attack was frightening enough, but Rocher actually withstood the sword light and charged straight forward without the slightest ounce of fear. Rocher will definitely get the first place in the illusion battlefield. At this rare moment, everyone in the universe had got the same answer. Even the mysterious girl had a look of disappointment on her face. "Zen, quite frankly, I was hoping that you could take the first place. But Rocher got Chiyu's sword inheritance. His luck is better than yours. You probably won't be able to make it." Letitia quietly beheld the scene, and Margaret was also silent. They had never seen Zen lose when he fought with the powerhouses at his realm. In this universe, Zen was not even at a disadvantage. And by chance, he would incidentally lose to Rocher in the end. The two women could not help but sigh in their hearts at the wonders of fate. Still, everyone was in awe observing Rocher's speed, which was incredibly fast as he made his way towards Zen. The sword light of Zen's chaotic god's intimidating strike split into two halves, subsequently slicing two ravines on the heaven-earth board. Clang! The two swords collided. This time, Zen had never been at a disadvantage when it came to his sword moves as his body was adept with the rhythm of the sword fight. However, in terms of his aura, he was far inferior. Bang! Bang! Zen quickly retreated a few steps sideways. With a twist of his sword, he began to charge up his second sword attack. Rocher's mind adamantly refused to give him another chance. Under the light, soft wave-like ripples spread out. Zen instinctively retreated his feet to the other side, but in that instant, countless bloody scars appeared on one of his arms. Puff! 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 Zen's arm looked like it had been filed. His wounds appeared densely arranged. His blood outlined these wounds, and they strangely mimicked the wave-like ripples released by Rocher. If it weren't for the fact that Zen's body was a divine weapon, his arm would have already been shattered to pieces. Rocher did not pause in the slightest as another ripple spread out. The speed was so swift that Zen was left with no time to dodge at all. Puff! This time, it hit Zen's face. Sadly, Zen looked extremely miserable now as numerous slashes were visible, from his face down to his neck. A drop of blood slowly dripped into Zen's eyes. If anyone could see closely, he or she would note there was a deep unwillingness in them. Chapter 1370, The Perfect Opponent. Despite this, Zen was not even the least bit discouraged. The chaotic energy appeared once again. His chaotic god's intimidating strike slashed out again. It was accompanied by the keen roar of the sword. Rocher was at a distance of only 10 feet from Zen. Thus Zen could instantly close on him. As Rocher's hand raised, the sword beam, like a silver python, once again darted forward to cleave apart Zen's chaotic god's intimidating strike. The sword light split in two, harmlessly falling either side of Rocher, and he still stood in front of Zen. Again, the chaotic energy in Zen's body was being rapidly consumed. It wasn't that Zen was weak either. Once activated with chaotic energy, even an ordinary cultivation method would become much more powerful than others. Besides, Zen had acquired enlightenment from Lone's sword. The sword skill he had mastered could utilize the chaotic energy. This sword technique was rather simple, with only a few sword strike moves. However, the power contained within each move had already far surpassed the power of other sword skills at the same level anywhere in the universe. However, Rocher was simply proving too strong. Zen was unaware of the matter that Chiyu had become a holy being, the 7 inheritances from the Lord of Weapons, or the mission that Rocher carried upon his shoulders. He only knew that he needed to think of a way to defeat Rocher. How tragic. Being constantly suppressed by Rocher, there's no chance for Zen to win any advantage at all. I can tell that he really wants to win. Rocher's strength is much more powerful than Nathan's. Buzz, buzz, buzz. This time, Zen didn't use his sword. The chaotic god's intimidating strike's invincibly sharp aura was the most powerful weapon at his disposal. However, this aura wasn't fully consummated, and his sword intent hadn't manifested at its top level either. Using the soaring snake sword in his hand, Rocher split the chaotic god's intimidating strike as if he were flaying the skin off it. However, if one were to observe carefully, they would have seen that Rocher slashing Zen's strike had been very coincidental. He was slashing towards the right side of the sword light. Zen's sword move had been executed by taking advantage of the metal law that supported the use of chaotic energy. Although the metal law and the energy had fused together, they were still slightly incongruent, revealing a flaw in them. If Rocher's sword strike should cut into that flaw, he would be able to easily slice it apart. But if Zen could activate 36 lotus petals and step into the emotion-closing godly way, then he would be able to fully eliminate this flaw. Unfortunately, Zen had not yet reached the emotion-closing godly way nor become a godly genius. As Zen's eyes flashed, a small amount of starlight appeared in his hand. Those stars were colorful, and they sparkled like flawless gems. The stellar body, multiple stars brilliance. The multiple stars brilliance was the most powerful strike of the stellar body. The spreading starlight was like a rapidly growing mushroom, enveloping the entire heaven-earth board. Under the bright brilliance, the whole board quickly collapsed and disappeared. When the starlight finally dimmed, Rocher once again appeared not far away. He was standing on top of a stone, holding onto his sword as a smile appeared on his imposing face. That smile was very friendly, as he decided that he would now go all out during the battle. Alas, even Zen's sword silently sighed. Zen has been completely outmatched, and I have done my best. The sword had been nourished with Zen's chaotic energy, so it had tried its best to support Zen during the battle. However, Rocher was ridiculously strong, and the sword was helpless and could do nothing about that. Rocher flashed to a point far away, giving Zen a chance to think about that. Zen was afforded a brief measure of time to figure out the last way to deal with Rocher. This time, Zen had made full preparations before entering the illusion battlefield. Zen had already made his best use of the Thunderbolt Annihilation and 8 Smoky Melodies, which were among 3 cultivation methods Gus had recommended. But at the moment, they would be utterly useless if Zen made use of them in an attempt to resist Rocher. He had never before used the enemy repelling arts because it was used to sever the causality laws and therefore break every method which opposed him. In the future, should he completely master it, he would definitely become a formidable powerhouse in the universe and be able to cut off the heavenly destiny that the Supreme Lord carried. However, he hadn't had a chance to make use of it before, and he couldn't use it to cut down the heavens, rules in the Hall of Causality. At this stage, he was faced with nothing but godly geniuses. The knowledge they had acquired was extremely remarkable, and they had also mastered the power of the godly way. Now the enemy repelling arts had become a thing of little value, for the time being. Even the dark star devouring of the stellar body was incapable of swallowing Rocher as he moved at an incomparable speed. Facing Rocher, Zen could therefore only rely on his sword. It seemed to be the only way to reach a breakthrough. The gleam in Zen's eyes suddenly disappeared. In that instant, he looked extremely cold and utterly unmoved. Again, he still tried to employ the chaotic god's intimidating strike one more time. Zen's sword spirit also felt quite helpless at this moment. It could only try its best to help Zen fuse the metal law and the chaotic energy more perfectly. But there was still a flaw. Until Zen managed to step into the godly way, there would be no way to make this fatal flaw disappear. Swish, buzz. With a flash of golden light, Rocher brandished his sword like a skilled butcher, who easily shaved a cow's bones off the meat. The 2 streaks of light were easily diced apart by his sword. Rocher seemed to do it effortlessly, but for Zen, it was not easy to make any move. Although his chaotic energy was incomparably dense, it was still limited. Zen had consistently employed the chaotic god's intimidating strike with all his might, and had already used up 60 or 70% of the chaotic energy in his chaotic sea. The chaotic sea in his body had shrunk away substantially. At the same time, the dense roots of the world tree were becoming exposed. How can I eliminate this flaw? Zen lifted his sword and floated in the air. It might be just as Rocher had said that Zen could match up to him only after Zen completely stepped into the emotion-closing godly way. At this moment, Rocher jumped up from the stone and dashed towards Zen with his feet on the light. In only an instant, that brilliant sword of silver light slashed down on Zen's head. Zen held his sword horizontally, and instantly a beam of golden light emanated from the sword, completely enveloping Zen in its protection. Clang! The two swords collided, and a sound rang out, crisp and clear as a bell. Even though he had blocked Rocher's attack, a layer of waves had spread out from Rocher's blade to cover Zen's body. Pa! 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 The protective golden light released by Zen's sword was extremely tough, but when it came into contact with those waves, it was forcibly dispersed. Puff! Puff! Streaks of blood-red waves rippled in a bloody tide on Zen's muscular chest. Although none of his bones were broken, Zen looked even more ragged and torn up. His entire body was now covered in blood. However, Zen did not stop or yield at all. He had fortitude, and he could withstand this kind of injury. Rocher was already close to him, and at the very least, he wouldn't be at a great disadvantage when it came to sword moves. Ding! 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 However, from now on, a large number of bloody gashes appeared on Zen's body every time he fended off Rocher's attacks. It was a shocking sight to behold, and not a single part of Zen's body was left unscathed. It can be over now. There was not a single trace of mercy in Rocher's eyes. However, if Zen chose to admit defeat, he would, of course, stop attacking him. However, if Rocher held back his strength from his attacks, it would be the greatest insult to Zen. At this moment, Rocher had completely gained the upper hand. As long as he continued dominating with his full strength, Zen would definitely be defeated, should the situation continue. Bang! Activate all the dragon scales. A majestic force was suddenly released from Zen's hand. After resisting Zen's returning sword strike, Rocher scampered backward for 10,000 feet. The force behind that strike was simply too great, so he had no choice but to retreat to avoid getting obliterated by it. Unfortunately, the power of dragon scales did not prove that effective in facing Rocher. Rocher could travel through the distance of 10,000 feet in an instant, and he thought it was already pointless for Zen to resist. However, Zen, who had been in the state of emotion closing, was like a lifeless puppet. He used his simplest thoughts to search for the method of defeating Rocher. Even though he might not defeat Rocher, he definitely wouldn't give up. However, just as Rocher was about to move forward for the killing stroke, Zen, who was floating in midair motionlessly, suddenly emitted a strangely reinforced will. At this moment, a tiny glowing crystal had appeared like a shining star above the center of Zen's internal world. Chapter 1371, The Instant Godly Tile. The piece of crystal was a cross with sharp edges. Its entire body was suffused with an illusory blue light, as if it were a 10,000-year-old block of mysterious ice. If Zen looked into his inner world, he would see the crystal float in the air within it, partly hidden and partly visible. It twinkled like a star, disappearing and reappearing again in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the aura that Zen exuded acted the same way. In that instant, he was like a true god who had descended into this world. However, in the next moment itself, the aura disappeared without a single trace. The scene was very strange. So much so that Rocher did not dare step forward in haste. It would be a rash move on his part. The strength of that aura made Zen seem as if he were the eye of a storm. If Rocher were to step within 1,000 feet of that aura, he would probably be crushed by it. Even from thousands of feet away, Rocher's heart throbbed incessantly, as if he were in the land of extreme chillness. At the same time, he felt as if he were at the bottom of the deep sea. The ginormous pressure made him unable to breathe. A wave of his soaring snake sword had it thrust into the board as he stood behind the blade. Buzz! A sharp light spread out, accompanied by many ripples. Rocher felt a bit better using the soaring snake sword to resist Zen's aura. When he looked at Zen, a strange expression entered his eyes, along with a trace of helplessness. "I know you're not weak, but you shouldn't be so strong either," he murmured. To Rocher, Zen's aura seemed ridiculously strong. In addition to Rocher, the few godly geniuses who hovered on top of the stones also looked distinctly uncomfortable. Even though the spaces above the stones were protected by laws, Zen's aura still brought forth a strong sense of oppression to them. This oppression was not intentional. It was like a lion had appeared amidst a horde of beasts. Even if the lion remained silent, it proved to be a great deterrent to the surrounding wild beasts. What is this? Zen himself was clueless. Just now, he had been pushed to the limits by Rocher. Even his chaotic energy was depleted. His emotion-closing godly way was not perfect. Losing to Rocher had been unavoidable. However, just as he had been about to lose, a special understanding had manifested itself in Zen's mind, as if someone had placed a line of thought from outside. It existed even now, appearing in an instant and disappearing in another. It was as if someone was inside his inner world, breathing in and out at great speed. Glancing into his body, Zen could see a bright blue light at the center of his inner world. He saw the flickering crystal there. A portion of chaotic energy flowed to the bottom of the crystal, forming a circular wheel in the shape of the 8 diagrams as it supported the crystal. What is this thing? Why would the chaotic energy be attracted to this crystal and turn into this shape? Zen attempted to control the small portion of the chaotic energy, but realized that he could not do so. What happened to you? Asked the broken sword in Zen's hand. The sword too had its pride. It was not willing to be driven by anyone other than Lone. Even if Lone had only lent it to Zen because he wished for it to borrow Zen's strength to repair itself, the sword had never bothered exchanging a single word with Zen. But at this moment, it could not take it anymore. From the very beginning, the sword had a strange feeling. It felt as if Zen had become a true god. The sensation was absurd and unbelievable, but it was also real. It was like the bright red sun in the sky suddenly turned blue one day. If the sun turned that color, no one would be able to believe it. However, it would be there to see in front of everyone. The feeling that Zen gave the others was as if they had all accidentally stepped into an unbelievable illusion. How could he be so powerful? The mysterious girl at the top of the clouds stared at Zen in a daze. She had been in charge of the heavens for 6 grand eras. She knew that a world of chaos presented itself in every grand era. When the world of chaos arrived, the super talents appeared one after another like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. However, in the previous few rounds of the illusion battlefield, the final showdown had not witnessed many accidents. It's the power of a godly tile. He has achieved the instant godly tile. It's unbelievable. This phenomenon is rare, even in the divine land. He doesn't have a godly plate. How can he store the instant godly tile? She murmured to herself. A godly tile was not an isolated existence. If no godly plate existed to store the godly tile, the latter could cause an explosion in the inner world. This was not the first time that she had been doubtful. However, she was completely unable to understand what was going on. A series of questions rose in her mind. It was indeed possible for someone to activate the instant godly tile before stepping into the godly way. This kind of godly tile was not a real one. It was one that descended only once. Being extremely unstable, it appeared in an instant and then disappeared in another. Theoretically speaking, Zen was a true god at this moment. The people within the painting of the illusion battlefield could sense Zen's aura and transformation, but the numerous warriors outside the painting could not see it. What happened? Why did Rocher retreat? He ran so far away from Zen. Why does Zen suddenly seem so strong? I bet all my money on Rocher. The warriors could not comprehend why Rocher, who had previously been as vicious as a tiger, suddenly fled. Even some of the supreme lords could not understand what had happened in the painting. Zen, however, rather liked this feeling. He could sense the unprecedented power that the blue crystal emanated. Countless cultivation methods existed in this universe, but they were all the same to him. When used, they gave him a strong sense of familiarity. However, the power in this crystal was different. It was rather strange and ominous. He could not tell what rules were contained within it, and he did not know what kind of characteristics this power possessed. Zen only knew that this power was strong. Very strong. How do I use this power? Suddenly, an idea occurred to him. He extracted a stream of chaotic energy and drilled this strand into the circular wheel in the middle of his inner world. Passing through the circular wheel, it once again entered the cross-shaped crystal. Whoosh! After passing through the crystal, the originally grayish-brown chaotic energy was coated in blue light. Just as this strand of chaotic energy left Zen's inner world and began to spread toward his chest, an invisible layer of frost left his body, covering the entire heaven-earth board with it. Stones, the board, the soaring snake sword, and Rocher were all instantly covered in a thin layer of ice. Crack! Rocher shook his shoulders as his body trembled. The thin layer of ice on his body instantly split open and slid down to the board, smashing to the board and transforming into a number of exquisite flowers. The ice posed no threat to Rocher, but the aura that escaped Zen's body could clearly freeze the world. Zen's change was very intimidating. It's the power of the godly way. You've been cultivating the emotion-closing godly way, but you activated the internal momentum of the ice mirror godly way simultaneously. What happened to you, Zen? Rocher whispered. He could not figure this out, for he did not know enough about the divine land. All his knowledge came from the records of the treasure trove of the Lord of Weapons. So how could he tell that Zen had activated the instant godly tile? The instant godly tile only lasted for a moment. It was true that some true gods in the divine land could experience such unexpected events. They would originally possess a godly tile, but in a short period of time, another godly tile would appear. The newly manifested godly tile could even take over the godly plate. But there existed a prerequisite for the instant godly tile to appear, and that was for the person to possess a godly plate. If the instant godly tile were to appear in a warrior's inner world without a godly plate, its only outcome would be for the inner world to explode straightaway. This meant that the elixir field would shatter. A warrior would then become an ordinary, useless individual. But when the instant godly tile appeared in Zen's case, a portion of the chaotic energy within him transformed into a godly plate to store the tile. Until now, not a single person in the divine land knew why the instant godly tile had appeared in that instant. For true gods, the instant godly tile was not of much use. After all, each one of them already possessed a godly tile, and the godly ways that they pursued were completely different. But for Zen, it had been rather useful. He brandished the sword in his hand again. The internal momentum of the ice mirror godly way transferred over an icy blue light to the broken sword. The cold energy that lingered around Zen's body changed to an ice lotus flower that gradually unfolded its petals. A wisp of sword intent had already condensed itself into a form. Chapter 1372, Heaven Opening Sword Book. Since Zen had never stepped into the godly way, his chaotic god's intimidating strike had never been completed, and it still had a flaw. He also knew that the sword in his hand was doing its utmost to make up for this flaw. But since this flaw was from his emotion-closing godly way, something he had yet to completely comprehend, it was impossible for the sword to completely fix the flaw. What was more, Rocher's sword was way too sharp, beyond anyone's imagination. His keen observation of Zen's flaw had helped him break Zen's chaotic god's intimidating strike pretty easily. However, things were different at the moment. He could sense that the cold power had an incomparably powerful internal momentum. And it wasn't from the emotion-closing godly way. But the internal momentum had almost made up for the flaw once it had been infused into the chaotic god's intimidating strike. Perhaps it could no longer be described as making up. The internal momentum was far purer and much more powerful than Zen's emotion-closing godly way. So much that it had completely changed the attributes of Zen's sword. Zen slashed his sword at Rocher, causing an immense coldness to emanate from the sword. The sword light was divided into 3 layers. While the outermost layer was the icy blue sword light, the innermost layer contained the metal law and chaotic energy, and thus was the metal and gray sword light. As he faced this strike, the fighting spirit in Rocher's eyes exploded like 2 balls of flames and had begun to burn. It was close to impossible for him to resist this blow. But just because he could not resist it didn't mean that he would give up. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the soaring snake sword as his other hand swept towards the edge of the sword. Boiling hot blood burst into the air in a fountain, clotting almost instantly. The heaven-earth board was freezing, with the temperature as low as it could get. Rocher's eyebrows furrowed as a flame appeared in his hand. He grabbed the blood clot and melted it, using the blood as the paints. 13 blood runes appeared before him in the air. With a hiss, all these blood runes were Rocher's blood essence. Activating these blood runes with his blood essence was also a method he had learned from Chiyu's treasure. Soon after they were formed, the blood runes began to rise rapidly into the air, forming streams of blood mist that began to swirl around the soaring snake sword. The moment he gripped his sword, a blood-red light, filled with Rocher's will, shot up into the sky. Rocher's face, which was originally pale, turned blood-red as his aura changed abruptly. At this, Rocher's mind filled with memories of what he had witnessed. The first year of the breaking of the chaos. Ever since the chaos had been broken, it had only been a divine era. Chiyu said it was too crowded here. The creating axe had shattered years ago and to open up more space was simply too difficult. Then, Chiyu climbed to the top of the grand tower, fused the soaring snake into his sword, combined the sword with the theurgy of wind and thunder, released the heaven-opening sword book, and struck in the south. The strike spread 30 million miles. And with this, Chiyu had opened 30 million miles of the chaos. But he thought it was still not enough, which was why he had been launching strikes for several months. He had launched 100,000 slashes so far. Qiyu alone had opened nearly half the southern divine land. He had asked someone to plant the hidden wood to help stabilize the space. The sword in his hand was probably the heaven-opening sword. Even someone like Qiyu had been exhausted and fallen into a deep sleep after launching 100,000 slashes. This sword had the power to open the heaven, and so did the soaring snake. The heavenly sword illustration, however, was merely an essence of the heaven-opening sword book. It was like a key, being passed around with the wind. And then, Rocher had picked it up. And from the moment he had picked up the key, his fate no longer remained ordinary. He consolidated it all, step by step, starting from the eastern region. He trained for a few years before finally obtaining Qiyu's treasure. It wasn't just a treasure, but was also an inheritance that he had to obtain. This fate was nailed into his future once he had comprehended the heavenly sword illustration. Whatever it was, the heaven-opening sword book was simply too complicated. The opening of the heaven was not limited to just the current round of heavens. Although the universe was vast, it was not infinite. In the face of the endless chaos, it could even be said to be insignificant. For Qiyu, the beginning swordsmanship was the most basic swordsmanship. Rocher had cultivated and broken through the preliminary level. He could perhaps even break through to the perfection stage. He had made fast progress. But until now, Rocher had only comprehended half a move from the heaven-opening sword book. This move is called the flawless south strike. On that day, Qiyu fell into a deep sleep and slept for the entirety of a divine era. The time of the gods was different from what Rocher had known before. He had only known that the time that a divine era spanned was unimaginable to him. Once he woke up, Qiyu saw the blue sky and a rainbow. The waterfalls were like white clothes floating into the sky. And he had had an epiphany for the 100,000 slashes, so he named this sword move, Flawless South Strike, by which he meant to say that the new space he had opened in the south was flawless. Although it was only half a move, Rocher had no choice but to use it when faced with Zen's strike. He did not care that he would lose a lot of his blood essence. After all, the loss of blood essence in the illusion battlefield wasn't a big problem. If he missed this battle with Zen, it would be hard to find another opportunity. The soaring snake sword floated into the air as the color of the blood light suddenly changed, emitting 1,000 different colors. A rainbow appeared suddenly out of nowhere. Under it was a beautiful world made of jade. It was marvelous, like a wonderland that everyone yearned for. Margaret knelt on the stone. She had originally wanted to praise the wonderful scene unfolding before her, but the aura that Zen's body was releasing made it difficult for her to say that. It was obvious that the warriors outside the painting wouldn't be suppressed by Zen's aura. "It's so beautiful," a number of women said admiringly. The moment their gazes landed on the rainbow, they just couldn't take their eyes off of it. It was as if they were glued to the rainbow. The painting of the wonderland seemed to have a strange, devilish quality. No matter which realms they were at, no matter how weak or strong their souls were, nobody could take their eyes off the scene. They seemed to feel that they would regret it for the rest of their lives if they missed watching the scene for even 3 seconds. Rocher stood tall on the scene, his brows like swords, eyes like stars, lips like a red rose, and teeth like snow. Many people in the universe were strongly attracted to him right now, especially the thousands of females watching. He waved the sword, the flawless south strike, the essence of the heaven-opening sword. It was just half a move, but its perfection was beyond imagination. The streak of rainbow was suddenly swept out of Rocher's soaring snake sword. An outline of a peerless wonderland formed wherever the rainbow passed by. But it was incomplete. If complete, a wonderland shining light would appear, and the scenes within would dance endlessly. Rocher had only managed to cultivate half of this skill, so all he could show was a still, peaceful scene. To him, it was inflexible. But to others, it was absolutely stunning. But this scene did not last long. Because the flawless south strike soon collided with the chaotic god's intimidating strike. With an almighty clang, when the two sword strikes collided, the scene before them began to tremble violently. The two streaks of sword light did not have the time to enter a stalemate. It took only an instant for the stronger strike to become obvious. Rocher was unable to break Zen's strike. He could not break the chaotic god's intimidating strike, which had been sealed with the complete godly way. Zen's sword attack had been executed with the help of the power of the instant godly tile. Zen was still far from being able to compete with a true god, but he was definitely not someone Rocher could contend with. The icy blue sword light slashed through Rocher's flawless south strike like a pair of scissors. Every scene was shattered and cries of alarm rang throughout the universe at this. This beauty had been short-lived, just like fireworks had only bloomed for an instant. Many martial artists closed their eyes. They didn't want to acknowledge that the scene was broken. The chaotic god's intimidating strike had struck through the wonderland. Rocher was still brandishing his sword, reeling from being unable to withstand the attack. But he still wanted to use the edge of his sword to tear at Zen's sword light. But when he swung his sword downwards, it did not even break through the icy blue layer on the sword light. And before he knew it, the sword light had pierced through his chest. There was no sign of regret on Rocher's face. He had already done his best and in the end, had lost to Zen. But even though he had lost to Zen, fighting Zen would still be a joyful thing to him. One couldn't lose one's target, and Zen had been one of Rocher's most important targets. He believed that such an opportunity would present itself to him again. Zen had won this battle. This had depressed a lot of people in the universe. They hadn't believed in Zen's strength and had seemed to believe more in Rocher. All big and small bankers in the universe would make a fortune in this round. On the other hand, the gamblers who had bet on Rocher were on the verge of tears. Chapter 1373, killed 9 seconds later. Some gamblers in the universe had bet on Zen. They were thrilled to win the riches out of the blue. However, be it the losers, the winners, or the dealers, none of them knew that this was going to be their very last carnival. It was the last peaceful period for the martial artists of the 100,000 supreme worlds. Soon, the entire universe would fall into panic and crisis. This battle is indeed exciting. Can a world lord break Zen's sword strike? Ha, you must be joking. In the end, Zen is only a warrior at the Soul Sea realm. It is impossible for him to defeat a world lord who is 3 realms higher. Indeed, however, to be honest, the idea that this sword strike could kill a spirit transformation realm warrior is truly unthinkable. Zen is only at the Soul Sea realm. After Zen won the battle with Rocher, the two of them sat on their stones with their eyes closed in meditation. They did it to recover their life vitality or chaotic energy and also calm their minds. In this sort of battle, where one's capability was used to the limits, this was the most convenient way to receive some epiphany. Before this, although Rocher's sword attack had not been able to block Zen's, which was almost like a true god's, it had still been a welcome boost to his mental state. After he absorbed some life vitality jades, he sank into deep thought. Zen's recovery was relatively troublesome. Chaotic energy was far more solid than life vitality. Although Zen had absorbed a great deal of life vitality jades and transformed the life vitality into chaotic energy, it was like a drop of water in a bucket. In fact, because of the characteristics of chaotic energy, it could completely devour all living things and transform them into chaotic energy. But now that Zen was bound to the stone, it was unsuitable for him to do so. He had used up nearly half of his life vitality jades and only restored about 1/5 of his chaotic sea. If nothing went wrong, there would occur a final battle for him. That would depend on the outcome of Nathan and Kurt's battle. If Nathan defeated Kurt, he would have to face Zen and compete for first place in the illusion battlefield. On the other hand, if Nathan lost to Kurt, he would have to fight Rocher for the second place. Regardless of Nathan's victory or defeat in his battle against Rocher, Zen would immediately be promoted to first position. However it ends, I still need to replenish my chaotic energy, Zen murmured. His face revealed some distress. What exactly is that cross crystal? After defeating Rocher, the crystal had disappeared from Zen's inner world in a flash. The chaotic energy that had formed the round plate also scattered away. It was as if the crystal had never even been there. It brought Zen victory and at the same time filled his head with innumerable doubts. Zen had felt the aura coming from his body change dramatically. The power contained within the crystal was beyond the limitations of the rules of the universe. Zen, however, was unable to control the crystal. It appeared in an instant, and disappeared just as quickly. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He felt the boundless vitality between heaven and earth gush down from above his head. The vitality between heaven and earth was extremely dense. It flowed down from the top of Zen's head and spread through his veins. Finally, like a river gathering in the ocean, it flowed into his inner world to eventually be devoured by the chaotic energy. Goodness, so much vitality between heaven and earth, he exclaimed silently. Zen raised his head and looked up. The thick clouds in the sky were quietly moving. He did not see anything suspicious. It must be her, he said, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. Right at this moment, Kurt and Nathan stepped onto the heaven-earth board. Their stones landed in very strange positions. The black stone on the sun position had been captured. At this moment, the Go game was about to come to an end. As for Nathan's white stone, it had returned to the sun position. A wide smile blossomed on Nathan's face when he saw where his stone was positioned. To him, this was a great opportunity. The situation on the board was simply too complicated. Even Nathan, who was proficient in the game of Go, was unable to see through this move. Previously, many people proficient in Go game thought that the player who played the game was very weak. But this was a great turning point. It directly revived the entire situation of the white stones and also changed Nathan's fate. I will still win. Nathan, who was standing on the heaven-earth board, had a proud expression on his face. His belief was stronger than it had ever been. Only by having faith in himself could he go further. Nathan was absolutely confident of it. However, this confidence was shattered at once when he saw the fight between Zen and Rocher. The talents of the thoughtless minds represented the entire universe's talents, and Nathan was almost invincible among the lot. Among the top 300 warriors, he had once regarded Lawson as his greatest opponent. He was simply unafraid of any opponent whom he had once defeated. First place was almost within his reach. But just now, when he saw Zen and Rocher exchange blows, his state of mind experienced great turmoil. Where did these two warriors come from? Why were they so strong? Nathan feared losing his confidence the most. To him, confidence was equal to strength. What was most despicable was that when the two of them fought, they messed with the stones on the board, yet the mysterious woman did not recover the stones. The entire board was in disarray. He was not sure if this game of Go could still be used to deduce the future of the universe. If he could not rely on others, he could only rely on himself. After defeating Kurt, he should have a face-off with Zen. After that, Kurt would only be able to compete for fourth place with Shania. Nathan was hoping that the mysterious woman would carefully finish the last few steps of the game. However, Kurt's strength could not be underestimated either. None among the top 5, Shania, Kurt, Nathan, Rocher and Zen, could be underestimated. Thinking of this, Nathan could not help but sigh. Why are all of them such mighty warriors? Nevertheless, I'll be the winner. Kurt's face was as calm as ever. Nathan had not revealed his trump card, but the title of the #1 godly genius was certainly not so easy to obtain. When Nathan stepped onto the heaven-earth board, Kurt raised the staff in his hand. The 9 rings on the staff had already been cut up by Rocher. As the staff was raised, a blood-like smell spread. Asura, puff. Kurt, who had been looking rather friendly, now had a ferocious gleam in his eyes. It was as if he was an inhuman beast. His entire body had grown by half, and his face held a violent expression. Nathan was aware that Kurt was much more powerful than his previous opponents. It would be impossible for him to defeat Kurt easily. Nathan finally became serious. It was the first time he was weighing his options in the illusion battlefield. He took out a fiery red spear from his Sumeru space. Nathan has a weapon. Did he use any weapon before? Who said that he couldn't use his weapon? Nathan and Rocher were different. Rocher always carried a sword on his back and seldom used it, so people naturally questioned it. At the same time, they regarded it as him putting on an act. However, Nathan did not reveal his weapon. His palm strike was already so sharp that people had thought that he would go up against all his opponents with his bare hands. Some martial artists practiced special cultivation methods, such as the specialized palm and fist techniques. It was not strange for them not to use a weapon. Thus, Nathan taking out the spear was rather puzzling. The moment he took out his spear, Kurt, calm as ever, stepped on a stone and pushed it with a tremendous force. He had attacked first. The little monk is no longer calm. He is doomed. In a battle like this, whoever gets anxious first will lose. That might not be the case. Who knows, maybe Nathan is weaker. Amidst the discussion of the crowd, Kurt rushed toward Nathan, who was holding his spear high. During this rapid sprint, Kurt's figure suddenly stopped. He stopped so suddenly that even the martial artists watching the painting failed to keep up. Kurt, who had come to a halt, suddenly retreated by over 100 feet before changing his angle to sprint ahead. Then, he came to a stop once again. On the other hand, Nathan only held a spear in his hand as he faced Kurt. If Kurt changed his angle, Nathan only moved slightly and adjusted the direction of his spear. Hints of confidence and indifference hung on his face. Kurt was able to foresee with the constellation eyes. He adjusted his position more than 10 times. No matter which way he rushed, he foresaw a scene that would happen 9 seconds later with the help of constellation eyes. He saw the scene of him getting killed by Nathan. Chapter 1374, Fight for the First Place. Kurt's Buddhist heart was extremely stable. Back in the hidden spirit temple, there was an ancient bell. Each time this bell was rung, the 6 realms of existence would appear as an illusion and create endless cycles of reincarnation. The temperance of one's heart meant entering the 6 paths of reincarnation. The Hidden Spirit Temple's core disciples were the only ones qualified to enter the ancient bell's interior and ring it once a month. This process helped them cultivate and temper their Buddhist heart. The illusion of 6 realms was unforgiving. It was something that truly tested a disciple's Buddhist heart in ways one could not even begin to describe. But if disciples went into it more than once in a month, it might shatter their hearts in the process. However, Qart was different. Instead of once a month, he rang the bell every day for 400 consecutive days. When he left, his heart was understandably stronger and much more stable than others. Qart was the only one who had done and could sustain such an ordeal. It could be said that he had the most stable heart out of all the disciples in the Hidden Spirit Temple. Nothing could shake him, except perhaps the scene right in front of him. No amount of ringing the ancient bell could ever prepare his heart for something like this. What Qart comprehended was great wisdom and tremendous courage that bordered on pure fearlessness. However, Nathan's strike seemed to have the ability to destroy the Buddhist heart. His vision of the future had been extremely grim and it was soon about to come true. Nathan would indeed be able to kill him with a single spear strike. This event would happen in the next 9 seconds and each second he spent thinking about it made his chest feel stuffy. It felt as if a heavy hammer was slamming itself down his Buddhist heart. The knowledge of his imminent destruction made Qart turn a pale shade of white. Nathan, on the other hand, remained calm as he held onto his spear. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Qart continued to revolve around Nathan. Meanwhile, Nathan simply stood in his spot, spear still aimed at Qart. This went on for 10 more rounds. Puff. The battle had been at an initial standstill. However, this quickly changed the moment Qart spat out a mouthful of blood and stopped moving. This scene astonished the warriors outside. The two of them haven't even fought yet, so how in the world did Qart get injured? I have no idea, I'm just getting more and more confused. Could it be that Nathan knows some kind of evil martial art? The last assumption was highly unlikely to be true. Ordinary evil martial arts wouldn't have worked in these circumstances. Also, Nathan was not someone who would practice such a thing since it wasn't in his character to make use of such despicable tricks. Qart stood still to stabilize himself. He then put his hands together and closed his eyes. The future still hadn't changed and no matter where Nathan attacked, the result would still be the same. This wasn't good. His Buddhist heart was in danger because of Nathan's spear. He would not die for real in the illusion battlefield. All Qart would need to do was to restore his physical body. However, if his state of mind was affected, then it would bring unnecessary trouble to his Buddhist heart. I admit defeat, Qart announced. He saluted with one hand and retreated. What was that? He just admitted defeat straight away. That monk is useless. The fight hasn't even started yet. What a good-for-nothing fighter. He got scared the moment the battle was about to begin. Ha ha, it seems the Hidden Spirit Temple doesn't really have any peerless talents to boast of. Nobody in the top 10 admitted defeat. At least, not normally. Everyone was understood to have unfathomable strength and nobody would be willing to give up so easily. This was the reason why fights amongst those at the top were often incredibly intense. Margaret, of course, was an exception. Ever since she entered, she had always performed casually and did not try her best at all. This was the reason why Qart's admission of defeat was incredibly surprising and also a tad bit scandalous. Nonetheless, Nathan quickly put away his spear and stuffed it into his own Sumeru space. He did not say a word as he flew towards the sky. Qart could only watch his figure as he too flew back towards the stone. His actions today would no doubt haunt him in the form of harsh criticism. Despite that, he still believed that he made the right decision. Roche, what's your opinion on this? The way Nathan held the spear just now left a really deep impression on Zen. Just holding the spear in a certain way was enough to make his opponent admit defeat. Roche had a cautious look in his face. This guy's strength seems to be extremely special. Since Nathan won against Qart by default, he now needed to fight Zen for first place. If Zen were to win, then he would need to fight against Roche for second place. How special is it? Zen asked. Roche shrugged. I don't know. I just feel that his actions are really strange. Zen's eyes immediately lit up when he heard this. He too noticed this. Nathan's stance looked seemingly normal. However, the spear's position and altitude were strange. The spear's tip just seemed to be angled in such a way that confused Zen. He just had a feeling about it, the kind that was hard to describe. It was as if Nathan was standing there but also not there. Zen didn't really have the time to figure it out since he was now about to face him in the next round. Zen versus Nathan. These two will fight for the first place in this round, the mysterious girl announced in her characteristically cold voice. This battle would be the most crucial event in the illusion battlefield. The victor of this round would emerge as the top warrior of the universe and also as the main character of this era. According to the Supreme Lord's speculations, the victor would get the heavens' support. His luck would also be greatly affected. Everyone's focus was now on the two who faced against each other for the title of this universe's top warrior. Elena pulled a long face. She almost won the battle between her and Lavender, but now. Zen initially only had the fate to lead the world of chaos, but this was already enough for Elena to deem him as a threat. However, she kept in mind that there were tens of thousands of warriors that carried the same fate. Her caution against Zen would have to ultimately be decided by the results of this competition. She never expected it would turn out like this. Zen was now about to compete with the godly genius of the Xuanyuan clan for first place. This person was truly invincible and unstoppable. How could Lavender be so lucky? Elena was extremely beautiful, but she was born with a ruthless and vicious aura. If Zen truly got first place, then it would be impossible for her to force him to stay in the fairy palace. But would she just let him return with Lavender to attack her? Of course not. Right now, Lavender was still in the fairy palace with no idea of what was currently happening. She was most probably bored out of her wits. There was no illusion space within this fairy palace, so she had no way of knowing Zen's ranking. Freya had also entered the illusion battlefield but got eliminated fairly quickly, so she also did not know anything about the current situation. The past few days had been quite lively as the entire universe was filled with roars from the roaring tokens. Some Supreme Lords would also mention Zen occasionally. A few praised him while others cursed him. Judging by those remarks, it was highly likely that Zen managed to enter the final stage. Freya had no idea of his ranking, but it would be great if he made it to the top 10. She was still a bit worried though. There were so many powerful talents from the larger clans and Zen might not necessarily be a match for them. She felt that he didn't really have that much experience and cultivation to pose as a threat against those geniuses. Lavender sat on one side of the octagonal pavilion and dipped a toe in the water. This caused a small ripple to appear on the surface that she found herself staring at as she got lost in her thoughts. She was not normally like this. Even she herself knew that this wasn't really her normal personality. She had only gotten like this because of Zen and staying by his side for so many years. She was no longer the queen of killings. Instead, she was now a woman who seldom cared about anything and was extremely reliant on Zen for everything. Back in the illusion battlefield, Nathan once again stood on the heaven-earth board. He was extremely wary of Zen, having observed the battle between him and Rocher. Zen's extremely cold internal momentum had the capacity to suppress his warrior spirit. At that moment, Nathan's indestructible confidence wavered. Even a true god wouldn't be able to do anything about it. That split second of influence caused Nathan to suddenly doubt his life's struggle and effort. Fortunately, the aura around Zen disappeared after a few seconds. Nathan had no idea how Zen did that. It was as if this ability of him had been forced out by Rocher earlier. However, Zen didn't seem to have the ability to control it. Nathan observed the situation very carefully and noticed the split-second doubt that appeared in Zen's face. It was all right. Even if Zen's sword was powerful, he still had a chance to defeat him. Clap, clap, 2 stones were placed on the heaven-earth board as the 2 of them landed on its surface. The sight of where the stones landed filled Nathan with joy. He almost couldn't believe his luck. Zen couldn't help but frown when he noticed the joy on his opponent's face. He had heard Nathan talk nonsense because of the stone placement previously and it made Zen very unhappy. It seems like I have no shortage of lucky chances in my life, Nathan said as he laughed out loud. Chapter 1375, Bickering. There was a dull thud when Zen landed on the board, which meant that the black stone landed on the board as well. Nathan had also landed on the board, so the white stone had landed too. Their movements caused a series of new, fascinating moves on the board. After the white stone had landed, it connected with the other white stones and the situation was quickly reversed. The dragon that black stones had destroyed a while ago now appeared again. In addition, Nathan's stone was the icing on the cake. What a move! It seems that you are destined to lose this battle, Nathan said with a smile. And look over there. He stretched out a finger and pointed towards a few stones. Margaret played all those stones. They were originally blocked off from each other, but now they're interconnected and have formed the trend of love, whose target is me. Zen knew that this man wouldn't be saying anything good. He couldn't see any sign of the trend of love at all. And then, Zen asked indifferently. He almost rolled his eyes, but Nathan swelled with pride. Nathan then answered, my fate is to be guided by the heavens. I don't know if you understand the logic behind it, but these fate deductions will happen and I will definitely make history. As the saying goes, the trend of the heavens is irresistible, those who submit will prosper, and those who resist shall perish. You won't be able to resist it. Whoosh, his hand went behind him and drew out the spear. The spear's tip suddenly trembled and stirred non-stop. If you know your situation and what to do, then you clearly shouldn't make things difficult for Margaret. Zen's face couldn't help but twitch. This guy is so shameless, he thought. Suddenly, his train of thought was interrupted by a shouting voice. Hey, I don't know you, so stay away from Zen and me. Opposite them was Margaret, whose face was red with anger. Nathan had been acting really weird since she first met him, but she could let that slide. However, he was now advising Zen to leave her. She could tolerate some of his issues, but the fact that Nathan had actually asked Zen to leave her made her burst her bubble. You think that the heavens are on your side, and no one will stop you. But I'm Zen's wife. Stop drooling over me. You think I'll fall in love with you? Ha ha, what nonsense are you talking about? The universe is so big, but I'm afraid it won't be able to make up for your empty brain. As a woman, Margaret knew how to bicker with others. She wasn't this sharp-tongued before, but she had stayed with a group of women for a long time back when she had practiced in the Apeiron Tower. Her time there had made her much wittier. The martial artists from countless supreme worlds who were watching them instantly burst into laughter. Nathan could be considered a Mr. Right for many women, but being ridiculed by Margaret truly burned his face off in embarrassment. He was indeed on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Once again, he fell into a state of doubt. He doubted his own charms and lost his self-confidence. Nathan's warrior spirit was supported by his absolute confidence. He believed that if he wanted something, he would be able to have it and he would definitely succeed. There was nothing in the universe that he could not do with all his efforts. But now, just Margaret's words dealt a heavy blow to his mentality. It was even worse than the blow when he had witnessed the fight between Zen and Rocher. I was telling the truth. This is our fate, Nathan managed to say. For the first time, he lost his confidence in front of a woman. Are you an idiot? Did you know what you said made me unhappy? Besides, this is only your deduction, and it won't happen in the end, Margaret sneered. Nathan remained silent. It wasn't that he didn't have any words to refute her, but rather, he didn't know what to say when he saw the excitement on her face. When Margaret felt that he wouldn't say anything else, she snorted coldly and turned to face Zen with a sweet smile. Honey, I'll be rooting for you. Her words dripped sweetly off her lips like honey, and the crowd could tell that she loved Zen very much. Meanwhile, Letitia couldn't help but feel her skin crawl when she heard Margaret call Zen, honey. The feeling of loss further intensified as she sulked quietly in the pure jade sacred palace. She wasn't jealous of Margaret's achievements, but the fact that she could stand beside Zen. Letitia gently bit her bottom lip as her face gradually twisted into a miserable frown. On the other hand, Zen smiled faintly at Margaret and nodded at her. Then, he raised the broken sword in his hand. After this battle, the sword would be returned to Lone. However, a violent gale unexpectedly swept across Zen's face just as he had raised his sword. The gale was strong and vigorous, and Zen felt as if he was smashed with a large rock on the head. It was Nathan attacking him. He probably rushed like that because Margaret's words provoked him. In terms of speed, Nathan was slightly slower than Rocher. But this time, he jumped up and dove over. He didn't aim the spear in his hand straight ahead, but smashed it down instead. He hit down hard without hesitation as the spear's tip glinted sharply under the light. Just how much do you hate me? Zen was almost speechless. A white mist appeared around his body and with a slight shake, he circulated the 8 smoky melodies and easily dodged Nathan's sudden attack. Boom! The spearhead was only 2 fingers wide and 3 inches long. Yet, the impact of the strike was far from weak. The ground where Zen stood just now had caved in and formed a huge crater, which continued to spread to the surrounding area. However, Zen had long since floated to the other side of the heaven-earth board. Whoosh! Nathan raised his spear high as he moved quickly like a shuttle. He swiftly flew forward as he dragged numerous afterimages behind him, then he closed in on Zen and thrust out his spear once more. Zen paid him no mind and circled around the spear once. This time, however, he didn't dodge. Instead, he closed in on Nathan, and simultaneously swung his sword at Nathan's head. In turn, Nathan quickly lowered himself to avoid Zen's attack. He then turned the spear around so that its long end would strike towards Zen. If it was an ordinary martial artist who were in Zen's place, they would probably be cut into half. Humph! Zen snorted coldly. An immense force within his hand erupted, and he didn't choose to dodge. Nathan fought like a madman as he drowned Zen in a barrage of head-on attacks. However, Zen wasn't afraid of anyone in close combat. Boom! There was a muffled sound as Zen's fist, which was filled with the power of dragon scales, landed straight on the spear's end. It was true that Nathan's spear technique was strong. From the looks of it, he seemed like a spear expert. Since his spear bounced back, he used the window of opportunity to turn it around and aim it at Zen's face. His spear was extremely long and narrow. If Zen had gotten hit, it would feel like a cut from a blade. Furthermore, Nathan's spear was a supreme divine weapon after all. It would really hurt Zen badly if the spear were to hit him. Of course, Nathan was unhappy and naturally wanted to vent his anger out on Zen. He didn't care if this method could deal with Zen or not. What was important was he would get to release his anger. Right now. Yet before the spear could pierce Zen, the broken sword in Zen's hand suddenly swung by itself and pushed away the spear. The strong impact also pushed Nathan back a little. Zen immediately took advantage of Nathan's minor setback, and threw a punch straight at his face. Nathan didn't expect the punch at all. He was caught off guard and hit the corner of the board. He floated in the air for a long while before he slowly slid back down on the board. Zen had undoubtedly used a great deal of strength which had sent Nathan flying, but the man wasn't injured. Zen was amazed. He seems like he has steel tendons and bones of iron. I wonder what kind of physique he has, he thought. Chapter 1376, The Weird Spear. None of the top 10 warriors in the illusion battlefield showed any weakness. Their strength, cultivation methods, skills, and speed all reached the peak of the Soul Sea realm. If they showed even a hint of a weak point, their opponent would seize the chance to bring them down. It was just like Cindy's dream. While she was almost invincible in her dream, her own strength wasn't that remarkable. When the dream was broken, she would be left like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Nathan's physical body was not as tough as Zen's, but it was extremely tenacious. After taking Zen's punch head-on, he didn't get hurt at all. For a moment, Nathan was stunned as he fell onto the board. But just then, as if an idea suddenly came to him, a satisfied smile surfaced on his face. "I really shouldn't be speaking nonsense with you here," Nathan said as he shook his head. "Things like fate shouldn't be announced, to begin with. Time can prove it well enough. Maybe the fate displayed on the board can only be verified after many years. But things like your defeat, I can verify that immediately." With that, Nathan's aura gradually changed. He held his spear casually as he took slow steps towards Zen from the edge of the board. Every time he took a step forward, his aura seemed to increase. It was as if there was something invisible attached to his body. Although he walked slowly, his actual speed was by no means slow. If one took a closer look, they would see that after taking every step, he'd somehow glide along the board as if he were walking on ice. In Zen's eyes, Nathan was a giant approaching. While he wasn't as tall as a giant, his powerful aura made him seem like he towered over everyone. In Zen's previous battle, he possessed the cross crystal, and his aura was akin to that of a true god. But his suppressive force was applied only to the godly geniuses on the heaven-earth board. But Nathan was different. When his aura suddenly increased, it could even affect the people outside the picture. Outside the bounds of the picture stroll, countless martial artists stared at Nathan, dumbfounded. Under the suppression of his aura, their hearts began racing. But even though the aura was strong, its influence was still limited. Before such a majestic aura, spirit transformation realm martial artists only felt some pressure. When the many world lords faced this aura, their faces revealed only a trace of confusion. They were puzzled by how Nathan, a Soul Sea realm warrior, managed to even slightly shake their state of mind. From the moment he entered the heaven-earth board, Nathan hadn't yet displayed his full strength. The opponents he faced had either been sent flying by his punch or crushed by his palm strike. Even against Kurt, Nathan didn't get the chance to unleash his full strength because of Kurt's wise decision to admit defeat. But Nathan knew that the guy in front of him had no intention of admitting defeat. He was then left with a single choice. He had to use even stronger power to make his opponent understand what his name, Nathan Xuanyuan, stood for. Facing the approaching Nathan, Zen grew more and more cautious. The chaotic sea also began surging as chaotic energy began gathering around Zen's sword light like a tidal wave. In the exchange between the two, Zen clearly had the upper hand. But in a battle of this level, such an advantage was meaningless. The tables could turn at any moment. The most troublesome thing at the moment was that he failed to see through Nathan's ability. To defeat Rocher, Zen had already used all his trump cards. But Nathan's display of ability was only the tip of the iceberg, most of it was still hidden underwater. Pock! When Nathan closed the distance to a certain point, he stepped onto a stone. Suddenly, his body shot right at Zen. The spear was like a flood dragon that had just left its lair. Under Nathan's rapid thrusting, the spear shaft bent and pierced at Zen in a unique path. "This is the spear," Kurt exclaimed as he stared at Nathan, taking a deep breath. With the help of his constellation eyes, he saw the spear strike that shook his very Buddhist spirit to the core. Even now, he couldn't wrap his head around it. How could Nathan attack with such a strike? Kurt admitted that there was a difference in strength between him and Nathan, but he didn't think the gap was that great. What kind of godly way did Nathan train in? But at this moment, Kurt had no idea that Zen was feeling exactly the same way. This was the first of Nathan's strikes that he had taken seriously. In this situation, Zen felt as if he was on the verge of death. If the spear were to pierce him, he believed that not only his life would dissipate, even his soul would be destroyed. His warrior spirit would collapse along with it. What a powerful spear strike! Zen's heart began trembling uncontrollably. The first thing he did was retreat. After making the forceful energy explode, he simultaneously circulated the 8 smoky melodies, rapidly moving backward. The move wasn't exactly elegant, it was actually rather awkward, but he wasn't left with any other choice. The spear didn't contain any internal momentum, nor did it contain much skill. So why was it so powerful? As Zen retreated, the gears in his head got to work. Just then, Nathan's spear missed its target. But a purple spear light somehow erupted from the tip of the spear just as it missed, extending and following closely behind Zen. Whoosh, swoosh, the spear light followed Zen. "This spear light, it gives me the same feeling," Zen thought. It was an extension of the spear, its power wasn't considered something strong. In the past, Zen would have been able to block it with ease in a single sword strike. He could have stood at the same spot and let the spear light come at him without a problem. But now, he had a feeling. If the spear light hit him, he would end up dead as well. God's intimidating strike. As he retreated, a cyan sword intent shot out like a beam of light, striking that very spear light. Normally, the God's intimidating strike activated by chaotic energy was much more powerful than Nathan's spear light. Based on Zen's experience, this sword light could corrode the spear light and shoot right at Nathan. But the next scene had Zen stunned. Crack! As the sword light collided with the spear light, a small crack appeared on the sword light's surface. The crack came as quite a surprise. Although the sword light had color, it was technically a cyan light reflected after the sword intent was condensed. But the sword light didn't have a form, it was merely a ray of light. Just like a mass of air, an extraordinarily powerful mass of air. Who had ever heard of the air breaking? But the scene before him was real. As the cracks spread out, the sword light released by the God's intimidating strike instantly cracked and disintegrated. Lawson's lips curled into a cold smile. He couldn't help but begin laughing like the roar of a wild beast. Ha ha, Zen must be in the middle of a nervous breakdown right now. A fiery light flashed in Rocher's eyes as his expression turned solemn. What a tyrannical spear art. It actually shattered the sword light. Zen's sword light was actually shattered. But it's a beam of light. How can that be shattered? There will always be mysteries in this universe that we cannot understand. We must learn to respect them. While 99% of people in the entire universe had already seen this strange phenomenon, no one was sure of what it meant. Dang it, after the spear light shattered Zen's God's intimidating strike, it continued to rush towards him. And at this moment, Zen didn't hesitate at all. If he hesitated for even a moment, he would have been easily struck by the spear light and split into two. Chaotic God's intimidating strike. It was an enhanced version of the God's intimidating strike. While it was Zen's strongest strike, it was only used to counter this unremarkable purple spear light. Puff! The boundless chaotic energy then fused with the metal law and surged up once again. Zen's sword strike should be enough to offset 1,000 purple spear lights. This sword strike that mixed with chaotic energy shot out before colliding with the spear light. In an instant, another explosion resounded in Zen's ears. Pock! Another unimaginable crack appeared on the sword light. Then, it dissipated. Once again, the wisp of purple spear light shot out from Zen's sword light and continued pressing toward him as if it were a ghost from hell, continuing to bite down on Zen without the slightest hint of dispersing. Whoosh! As it shot over, Zen tilted his head to the side at a crucial moment. The purple spear light grazed right past his ear, piercing his earlobe. But just then, Zen heard another crack. This time, the explosive sound came from his very own body. Chapter 1377, Cunning. A crack had appeared on Zen's forehead, which quickly ran down to his neck and body. It looked much like what you'd find on a porcelain vase that fell onto the ground. It was a narrow crack, but a trickle of blood slowly flowed out from it. It was frightening to behold, as if Zen had been cut in half down the middle. However, his clothes remained completely undamaged. It was such an absurd thing. Despite the horrible appearance, the injury wasn't so serious though. The problem was how Nathan's spear had managed to cause such damage in the first place. It was unbelievable. His spear had sent out a purple flash of light, which had diffused both Zen's God's intimidating strike and the chaotic God's intimidating strike. Although the light hadn't looked powerful at all, it had caused Zen's impressively strong body to split when it flashed past his ear. This was beyond everyone's wildest imagination. Zen's eyes flickered with doubt as he stared fixedly at Nathan. The might of his spear was simply too frightening. If he had been directly hit by Nathan's spear, would his body have been shattered into pieces? He couldn't imagine how Nathan's spear skill was actually that great. I was right, his attack is just as powerful as I predicted earlier. Kurt remarked, and a brief look of admiration flashed on his face as he stared unblinkingly at Nathan. He could now understand why he had foreseen a despairing scene of himself before when he fought against Nathan. Kurt wouldn't have been able to dodge Nathan's spear thrusts, nor could he withstand them. If he hadn't admitted defeat earlier, he too would have been shattered into pieces. Why is Nathan's spear so powerful? Indeed, it's incredible. It seems to contain some special power. I can hardly believe my own two eyes. His attack had only flashed past Zen's face, but it almost split his body apart. What is this spear skill of his capable of? Many warriors commented and murmured with astonishment as they watched the fight. Nathan was well known as the #1 godly genius, but that was the only thing that most people knew about him. Few warriors had seen this legendary warrior up close by themselves, so his skills remained a secret to the world. Everyone knew that he was a powerful warrior, but no one could tell why he was the best out of all of the warriors. However, this single attack from Nathan had revealed one thing to most of the watching crowd: his power was something far beyond their knowledge. They could not even begin to understand what his power was at all. Only a few of the Supreme Lords could understand it. Everyone else, including the World Lords and the Saint Lords, couldn't comprehend the magnitude of his power. Did he use the space law? It didn't look like that. It's true that the space law would have had a similar effect of diffusing Zen's sword intent. However, it would have caused a black crack, because the power would shatter the space and reveal the shadow on the back of space. They are in the illusion battlefield. The back of space doesn't exist there. Many knowledgeable warriors began heatedly debating the fight and tried to analyze the theory of Nathan's power. In the territory of the Xuanyuan clan, every clan member was robed, and they all quietly stood in the middle of a massive square as they watched the fight happening on the picture scroll. The Xuanyuan clan was a dominant force and occupied a leading position among the top 4 clans of the Thoughtless Minds. However, compared to the 3 other great clans, the Xuanyuan clan had the fewest number of warriors. The other 3 clans all had over 1,000 branches and millions of members scattered through the universe. As for the Xuanyuan clan, they numbered less than 100,000. However, that had never been a bad thing. The smaller number made it an even greater honor to become a clan member, and of all the clans, the Xuanyuan clan was the most cohesive of the 4 great clans. Nathan has finally revealed his true strength, someone suddenly said, disturbing the silence. This is after all the final battle. It's time for him to do so, someone else replied. Honestly speaking, Zen and Roche both have the strength to oppose Nathan. They both obtained great inheritances from strong masters, but they will still be no match for Nathan in the end. His fate was preordained, and it had been decided at the moment of his birth, and it can never be changed. I don't know why you have been worried about him, another warrior said. The third voice was a rough-sounding voice, and it indicated that its owner was an obstinate and unruly guy. In the confines of the strict Xuanyuan clan, this kind of warrior was extremely rare. They were full of confidence in Nathan because they all knew his strength so well. Back on the board in the illusion battlefield, Nathan's lips slowly curled into a faint smile. He was fully satisfied with the result of his attack. He did not plan on defeating Zen quickly and neatly. Under normal circumstances, Nathan had never been a ruthless or cruel person. Despite his solitary personality, he was at least morally upright, and people like Zen could never affect his mood in the slightest. But at this moment, maybe because of Margaret's sake, he couldn't help feeling annoyed with Zen. He derived a deep satisfaction in knowing that Zen had been wounded by his first attack. Whoosh! He brandished his spear and its tip again flashed with a purple light. He looked at Zen and asked with a smile, "How do you feel?" Zen didn't reply, but merely stared straight at Nathan. The strangely intense feeling that Zen had felt about Nathan was getting stronger and stronger. The way Nathan brandished his spear, the position he stood, and the direction he faced. Everything looked almost strangely normal. However, everything had its limits. Once something was beyond someone's acceptable level, they would begin to feel strange about it. Suppose that there was a woman with a perfect face, and when someone looked at her closely for a while, he or she would begin to feel inexplicably strange, as if there was something out of place. This was how Zen felt about Nathan at that moment. He simply couldn't be bothered to answer Nathan's taunt. He knew clearly that he had to figure out the reason why he had this strange feeling if he wanted to defeat his opponent. However, it was inappropriate to just stand still and think, so this time Zen took the initiative to attack. Swish! Zen's figure flashed, but he did not rush directly toward Nathan. After having both witnessed and felt Nathan's great spear skill, Zen knew that rushing at him blindly was likely courting death. Just as Qart had done during his fight with Nathan, Zen also started to move around him at a great and nimble speed. A spear could only stab in a single direction at a time. Although the purple light released by Nathan's spear had changed its direction once, it did not seem to have the ability to follow its target. Remaining mobile was the best way to counter Nathan's spear skill. Zen therefore reached the same conclusion as Qart. After all, being mobile would increase his chances of dodging Nathan's spear. Seeing this, Nathan wore a wry smile. He thought nonchalantly, Qart inevitably admitted defeat to me after moving around me for 10 or so circles just now. Zen, are you also going to admit defeat? He grabbed the spear lightly in his hand and kept spinning around on the spot to face Zen. Swish, swish, Zen kept moving on the board and circling around Nathan. Do you feel tired now? Nathan asked with a slightly condescending smile, his eyes flashing with a hint of ridicule. Don't waste your breath by struggling in vain. It is already an unparalleled honor for you to have won the chance to be defeated by me. If you can find any flaws in me, then my name's not Nathan. Nathan snorted with laughter. Clearly, he was not worried at all. Zen's movements are nothing but a waste of time. He will be defeated by Nathan sooner or later. I think he's probably exhausted by his tricks. But Zen wouldn't be willing to admit defeat so easily in this battle for first place, right? Many of the audience were baffled by Zen's actions, but no one believed that he stood a chance against Nathan. After half a minute or so, Zen suddenly stopped in his tracks and stared hard at Nathan with a dumbfounded expression on his face. Have you finally thought it through? Nathan continued to ridicule him. Zen shook his head and slightly lifted his lips into a devious smile. So, surrender or die? Nathan asked, impatient now. Zen shook his head again and suddenly gave a broad grin. He pointed up into the sky and then down at the ground, with a crafty glint in his eyes. Nathan raised his head curiously and saw many profound law fragments spinning in the air, exuding the full might of the heavens. That was the sign of a thunder tribulation, which had just been formed after Zen's establishing of a connection between heaven and earth. Thunder tribulations. And so many. Oh, dang. Nathan cursed loudly and tried to scramble from his position, but it was already too late. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A dozen circles appeared under his feet and as they layered together they limited his movements. Boom. The divine lightning surged down like countless silver snakes and enveloped Nathan in a bright light. The power of the thunderbolt annihilation was magnificent. However, it was very difficult to secretly prepare it. This cultivation method was actually more suitable for creating traps. Admittedly, Nathan had lowered his guard because he thought that Zen was just moving around him like Qart had done. However, what Nathan didn't know was that Qart could predict his attacks through his constellation eyes, and thus he knew he had no chance of defeating him. As a result, he chose instead to give up the fight and he then immediately admitted defeat. Unlike Qart, Zen had no constellation eyes to predict the future. It still remained unknown who would finally win this fight. As he circled around Nathan, Zen had secretly drawn his chaotic energy from inside his body and prepared a trap on the board. 11 bolts of thunderbolt annihilation were equivalent to 11 heavenly tribulations. They were a heavy blow even to Nathan. Chapter 1378, Law Spear Strike. The heavenly thunder of this thunderbolt annihilation was doled out as punishment after the heavens had been triggered. The power of the thunder that a normal thunder law could produce could not hold a candle to the might of it. The snake-like bolts of lightning writhed and intertwined with each other, and in the end, they turned into silver dragons that pounced down. Lawson and Lucille happened to be hovering in the sky above the thunder. Although they enjoyed the protection of the heavens law and wouldn't be harmed, they still swiftly maneuvered the stones under their feet to a hasty departure at the sight of the terrible scene. Boom, boom, countless bolts of lightning instantly fell down, turning where Nathan stayed into a prison of thunder and electrifying static. These beams of lightning created a dazzling spectacle, and when the other warriors fixed their eyes on them, they could only discern a brilliantly white space and could not clearly observe the scene. The vast majority of spectators hadn't expected this turn of events. Zen had looked completely helpless only moments before, but now the fact that he'd successfully attracted such a large amount of formidable thunder tribulations had far exceeded their expectations. The power of the thunder tribulations is extremely strong. Underneath the punishment of these tribulations, Nathan would surely be seriously injured even though he might not die. These thunder tribulations probably won't be able to kill Nathan, given his strength. But he'll most likely verge on the cusp of death. All the warriors discussed among themselves. The 11 Thunderbolt annihilations arranged by Zen were not intended to be used only once, and he only needed to activate 3 Thunderbolt annihilations at a time. The 11 Thunderbolt annihilations would altogether last for more than 2 minutes. No matter whether they were able to defeat Nathan or not, it would be enough to keep Nathan occupied as he fought back for a while. This alone might not prove enough. After he moved to one side, Zen's gaze suddenly turned cold, and the sword in his hand once again condensed a sword intent. Chaotic God's intimidating strike. With a flash of golden light, a sharp sword beam shot straight towards the ring with a murderous intent. Although the flashes of lightning were powerful and it was almost impossible for anyone to look at it directly, Zen could still clearly see Nathan's figure. Right now, not only did Nathan have to face the thunder tribulations from the sky, but he also had to deal with the incoming Chaotic God's intimidating strike. He was in great danger at this moment. In the ring, Nathan was fighting for his life, and he had already reached a furious state. As long as Zen wasn't able to break through his spear skill in this battle, then he would already have been in an invincible position. However, he had fallen into the trap of the thunder tribulations due to his own carelessness. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. These thunder tribulations were dense, leaving Nathan no room to dodge. However, at this moment, Nathan had begun using a most unique movement technique. He seemed to be stepping on some sort of law, constantly moving within this ring of light. If someone were to have accurately measured Nathan's footsteps, they would have realized that his steps distance was 3 feet. Every single step he took was 3 feet long, and he placed each step's distance with extreme accuracy. Not only that, but his body's swaying scope always remained above 1 foot, and he stopped each time he took a step. When his body moved a distance of 1 foot, he would suddenly stop, and then turn 1 foot towards the next direction. No matter how he continued to dodge, he calculated every step he took. Most cultivators at this level had mastered the absolute control of their strength, and with one slash, they could cut off the legs of a mosquito without killing it. But Nathan's movement was so precise that it left the others both confused and shocked. With only his precise step, he was able to avoid most of the thunder tribulations. However, a small portion of the thunder tribulations still broke through and struck his head. Immediately, his entire body was charred black and he was covered in soot, making him a sorry picture of misery. In his fury, he suddenly sensed the incoming great threat. This guy even dares to launch a sneak attack on me. If other cultivators were to have fallen into this situation, they would most likely have died already. They wouldn't have managed to escape the streaks of heavenly thunder. Now Nathan also had to face Zen's strongest sword strike, on top of everything. How difficult would it be to deal with it? However, Nathan, who had been indignant earlier, now became exceptionally calm. In his eyes, all the colors of the world had disappeared. The entire world became a blur, filled with countless lines. In his eyes, he saw the 36 thick lines crisscrossing on the heaven-earth board, but there were countless finer lines tangled up in a mess between the thick lines on the board. However, the stones arranged on the board had remained flawless, without a single line appearing on them. The more lines that marred an item, the more flaws the item would have. The heaven-earth board was really easy to break, which was why Nathan could see there were many flaws exposed on it. However, the stones on the board could not be broken, and though there might be some flaws within them, Nathan could not see any in them. This was because of his current cultivation base not being high enough. Other than that, the streaks of heavenly thunder were also filled with cracks. Everything had its own rules as to how it worked, and the restriction of these rules was the various laws of the universe. The truth was that some laws had been unearthed by martial artists. They had carefully studied them until they had comprehended their profound mysteries. As for those original laws, they were the most important laws, and the number of warriors who cultivated them was the largest. At the same time, there were also some warriors who started cultivating some special laws instead of cultivating the ordinary ones. Those special laws included the circulation of stars, the dream revival, and the rebirth in darkness. Zen's stellar body used the stars' law to activate the power of stars. These laws had all been created by the heavens. The heavens had been constructed by the gods. The law of creation was the truth godly way, and the other laws were all created based on the truth. It was also the most important one among the 3,000 godly ways, and had spawned countless other ways that had existed for billions of years. It was also the foundation of the existence of the gods. Nathan's comprehension of truth allowed him to pierce through the operations of the myriad of laws in the world with his sight, so all he perceived were lines and points. That was the most essential scene in this world. Although the spear in his hand was a supreme divine weapon, it was not the most prominent treasure. However, he didn't need an extremely powerful weapon. In his eyes, anything could reveal a huge flaw. And the power of the lost spear strike that he cultivated was actually far greater than what everyone had seen. This was because the lost spear strike could follow through those invisible flaws to directly attack and defeat its opponent. That was the reason why Nathan brought down so much pressure on Qart. Before his confrontation with Qart, the lost spear strike had already been targeted at Qart's greatest flaw. 3 inches to the right of Qart's chest was a small, circular dot. Thin lines spread out from that small dot, and most of these thin lines traced to Qart's heart, while a small portion of these lines spread into his mind and even connected to his soul. If he had decided to use the lost spear strike to break through it, he would be able to completely disintegrate Qart, destroying his soul, state of mind, and physical body. That was why he had applied so much pressure on Qart. That dot was Qart's lifeline. Several years ago, Qart had cultivated the Golden Bell defense, and he discovered that 3 inches to the right side of his chest was his barrier. But Qart had never imagined that such a large flaw would appear on this barrier. Actually, when Nathan first saw Zen, he had felt a bit confused. He could see the flaws of all things by means of his comprehension of truth. The stronger one was, the fewer number of flaws they would have. A warrior at the Soul Sea realm would usually have more than 100 flaws. While there should be dozens of flaws appearing on the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors. Usually, Nathan could only see around 10 flaws in a Spirit Transformation Realm warrior. He could only occasionally perceive 1 flaw in a World Lord, although sometimes there were even none. The Supreme Lord had already surpassed the scope of Nathan's comprehension of truth, so it was impossible for him to assess their likes. However, there were only 4 lines on Zen's body, and Nathan could not figure out where his vital point lay. Zen was just a Soul Sea Realm warrior, so how could he only have a few flaws within his physical body? The number of his flaws was even smaller than that of a Spirit Transformation Realm warrior's flaws. Nathan was bowled over in confusion by this. However, it really didn't matter. Zen still had a few flaws, instead of having no flaws. As long as there were flaws, Nathan's lost spear strike would be able to display its terrifying destructive power. The spear light that he had shot out had once struck Zen's earlobe. A thin line had then appeared on his earlobe and extended all the way to the top of his head before spreading downwards. The purple spear light was not even that powerful, but it had still almost broken Zen into 2 from the middle. From this, it could be believed that it wasn't too difficult for Nathan to kill Zen. At this moment, Nathan was striding forward with his long spear pointing up into the sky. He no longer chose to evade the thunder strikes, and instead aimed up at the sky with a fierce thrust. "Break them for me!" Swish, swish, swish. All of a sudden, multiple lost spear strikes were launched, one after another. The rays of purple spear light were like thin lines, precisely piercing through the violent thunderbolts descending at him. Even though these lightning bolts were of the heavenly thunder, they still had their flaws. When those flaws were struck by the purple spear light, the lightning bolts became like snakes that had been struck, breaking apart, collapsing, and dissipating. Unexpectedly, none of the thunderbolts that filled the sky landed on Nathan any further. Chapter 1379, Walking either straight or sideways. Nathan instantly cleared all the thunderbolts above his head. This feat left the other martial artists dumbstruck. It was common knowledge that these kinds of thunderbolts could be obstructed either by a physical attack, or they could be channeled into the earth. However, Nathan had used his spear to smash them. This powerful visual was hard to describe and had surpassed the expectations of the many martial artists gathered round the illusion spaces. However, what they did not know was that Nathan's lost spear strike was also capable of dousing even a ball of fire upon contact. He had just blocked Zen's thunderbolt annihilations when a golden gray sword ray zoomed towards him. Humph! There was a trace of disdain on his face. Other martial artists might find it difficult to resist Zen's sword, but it didn't pose much of a threat to Nathan. This was because there was a flaw in Zen's attack. Rocher had a deep understanding of sword skills, so he was able to catch the flaw in the chaotic god's intimidating strike and destroy Zen's sword radiance. And Nathan could see the flaw even more clearly with his comprehension of truth. There was an obvious defect in the golden and gray sword ray. After Nathan took a step forward, he suddenly hurled the long spear in his hand, and a purple light hit the small flaw. Pop! The two-colored sword ray instantly disintegrated, transforming into sword-intense cyclones, which burst out in all directions like a shower of magnificent fireworks. After the sword ray dispersed, Nathan's expression turned cold and a wicked smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. He faced Zen once again. "You think you can defeat me just with this little trick?" Zen smiled and shook his head. Wasn't it a bit too stupid to think that he would be able to defeat Nathan by relying on the Thunderbolt Annihilation and the chaotic god's intimidating strike? Zen was only using these methods to observe and gauge his opponent. Ever since Nathan had stepped into the board, a puzzling thought had been lingering in Zen's mind and he was not able to solve it. But he had noticed something. Nathan's actions looked very casual and unplanned, but it seemed like he was following some sort of rule. Upon closer inspection, Zen discovered that his rule was about maintaining a certain distance. Nathan always moved a distance of 3 feet. No matter where he moved, the final position at which he stopped was the integral multiple of 3 feet from his original spot. If he took a step forward, he would be at a distance of 3 feet. It would never be 2 feet and 9 inches, or 3 feet and 1 inch. Although Zen was unable to achieve what Nathan had, he could see his game plan very well. Nathan was following this law strictly. However, although Zen had cracked this code, it did not mean that he could resist Nathan's spear. Nathan was in such a sorry state because of the Thunderbolt Annihilation. At this moment, he didn't want to waste time on Zen anymore. With a tap of both his feet, the spear in his hand raced towards Zen in a straight line. His trajectory is unfaltering. Zen's gaze flickered slightly and his body suddenly began to float. Facing Nathan, he swiftly floated away in a semicircular arc. When martial artists took to the air, their movements were erratic. Even when they flew in a straight line, they would sway to a certain degree. However, Nathan's flying trajectory was a straight line without any deviation, but upon closer inspection, it did give off a strange vibe. Now that Zen thought about it again, the bizarre look on his face became more and more obvious. When he fought with Kurt, Nathan did not make a move. Instead, he used his spear to face Kurt and spun non-stop at the place where he stood. Nathan had faced him in the same manner not too long ago. Standing in the same spot, he kept spinning around and around, not initiating the attack. The only 2 times that Nathan took the initiative were when he charged forward in a straight line with his spear. Could it be that he could only travel in a straight line? This was quite baffling. A crab could only walk sideways and this fellow could only walk straight. However, Zen felt that he was getting closer to the truth. When Zen was zigzagging in the air, Nathan did not use his spear. Could it be because he was unable to lock onto Zen? Or was it because he needed something to launch his attack? To destroy everything with a single spear strike was truly terrifying. In theory, this was also a method of the law of causality. One could rely on the heavens, law in order to achieve this. Such a powerful technique should come with a powerful restriction. But since Nathan was a godly genius, the godly way he cultivated should not be a law of the heavens. Zen pondered as he zigzagged backwards. Nathan's spear strike was so terrifying that he could not take it head-on. He wondered if Nathan would use his own spear when he moved. Soon, Zen discovered that his conjecture was valid. Nathan was able to move either straight or sideways. He really was like a crab. When Nathan scuttled sideways rapidly, his spear hurtled towards Zen, followed by a purple spear light as thick as a finger. Right now, Nathan was ready to kill. He wanted to get rid of Zen as quickly as possible without holding back. If his spear light were to hit Zen, it would be enough to obliterate him. Whoosh! Zen had already come to a conclusion in his heart as his body spiraled forward once again. If he guessed correctly, it should be very difficult for the spear light to change its direction. Even if it did, it could only shift at a very small angle. At that exact moment, Nathan had also seen through Zen's intentions. It was like he got a glimpse into Zen's mind. A sneer appeared on his face. Childish, he jeered. As Zen flew away in an arc, the purple spear light strangely turned in the air at a 90-degree angle and sped straight towards him. What's going on? Then Zen realized that he had made a mistake. The spear light could not turn, but it could change its directions at a 90-degree angle. Zen felt this scene look somewhat familiar in his heart. He was having a sense of déjà vu, a feeling that he had seen the same scene somewhere before. The purple spear light turned 90 degrees and continued to chase him. As he retreated, his eyes flashed as he remembered suddenly. Back on the Divine Kingdom continent, when he was undergoing his tribulation, an eye had appeared. The black light released from the eye had moved just like this, it moved in a straight line, without any arc. It felt like that black light had the power to destroy the world. What was the mysterious connection between the two? Regardless of what the connection was, Zen was well aware that the light was extremely deadly. He did not believe Nathan's nonsense, and more than that he was unwilling to be defeated by him. But the spear light was a bit faster than him. No matter how much he retreated, the distance between the two continued to shrink. Now it was gaining on him. At first, there was still a distance of 100 feet, but after a few seconds, the light quickly closed the gap between them and got dangerously close. 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet, go to perdition, Nathan cursed and shook his head slightly. In his mind, Zen was already doomed to lose. He didn't need to emanate a very strong aura. The lost spear strike was enough to completely decimate Zen, and there was no way he would be able to escape. As he retreated swiftly, Zen took a deep breath and his heart sank. Did he really have no way to turn the situation around in his battle with the aggressive Nathan? He was determined not to lose to Nathan. Now, he seemed somewhat panicked. However, a glint flashed across his eyes as he thought of something. With a pat, the mini-magnetic sacred mountain appeared in his hand. The mountain began to expand the moment it appeared, turning into a 1,000-feet-tall edifice that blocked Zen. I wonder if it will work. Nathan sneered and the spear light started drilling into the top of the mountain. He hadn't seen the magnetic sacred mountain in Zen's hand before, and now that he was pretty sure he would win, he did not pay too much attention to the mountain. It was ridiculous to use a mountain to try to stop his lost spear strike. He was confident that the mountain would collapse in the next moment. Bang! The purple spear light instantly got absorbed into the magnetic sacred mountain. But the thing that Nathan had expected did not happen. The purple spear light had only left a small white mark on the magnetic sacred mountain, and even that mark vanished soon. He was stunned momentarily before activating his comprehension of truth. When he looked at the mountain again, he was more befuddled. How come such a large mountain did not have any flaws? I see, this is the magnetic sacred mountain. Nathan only recognized the mountain now. He had once seen such a mountain in the hand of a member of the G clan. The 5 elements in the mountain were complex, as the 5 different original laws were uniformly mixed together. As the 5 elements were interwoven, they would be able to make up for each other's flaws. Nathan's current level of comprehension of truth did not enable him to see through the flaw. While he was pondering, Zen had already quietly moved to the top of the mountain peak, overlooking him. There seemed to be an extremely sharp cyan light in Zen's hand. It was the magnetic power that Zen had extracted from the magnetic sacred mountain. Chapter 1380, The Bane of Nathan's Life. Nathan was not the one who was most surprised at the moment. It was Lucille and the entire G clan who were staring in shock. Lucille had transmitted the G clan's secret technique of extracting magnetic power to Zen in exchange for Zen's blood refinement technique to refine the magnetic sacred mountain. Lucille thought this was a great deal. She had given the jade slip that recorded the secret technique to Zen fairly recently. But Zen had already mastered it. His speed was astonishing. The members of the G clan were shocked to see Zen had refined the magnetic sacred mountain. It seemed like their surprises weren't yet over. The G clan also had a magnetic sacred mountain. They had never heard of anyone throughout the universe who could refine the mountain. The patriarch of the G clan stared at Zen's magnetic sacred mountain and then looked at the cyan light in his hand before he said flatly, "Lucille taught Zen the secret technique that I created." What? The expression on the clan leader's face shifted. It would be a felony if the secret technique of the G clan spread out. Why was Lucille so stupid? He wanted to plead for Lucille right away. Lucille might be the most outstanding ace talent of the G clan. But if she had really taught Zen the secret technique, even the patriarch would not forgive her. The patriarch shook his head and continued, "Lucille is intelligent. If she was willing to give Zen the secret technique, she must have a reason for doing so." As he spoke, he continued to stare at the magnetic sacred mountain beneath Zen's feet, as if absorbed in thought. Thoughts swirled inside the G clan leader's head. At the patriarch's words, he naturally understood what was going on. It was impossible for Lucille to spread the secret technique at will. Moreover, magnetic sacred mountains were extremely rare. There were only 10 of them or so in the entire universe. It was close to impossible for an ordinary person to practice this technique without a magnetic sacred mountain. And here, Zen had refined a magnetic sacred mountain, and Lucille had taught him the secret technique. The most obvious possibility was that Lucille and Zen had finished an exchange. The laws in the magnetic sacred mountain were a mess, and it was impervious to everything. What kind of technique was needed to refine it? If Lucille had really gotten the technique in exchange, it would have profited the G clan. Zen is indeed a genius. He was able to extract the magnetic power in such a short period of time. Nathan will probably be in trouble. He can see through the laws of all things. But I'm afraid he won't be able to see through the magnetic power, the leader of the G clan said calmly. Just as he predicted, Nathan saw the ball of magnetic power in Zen's hand and frowned. After he had comprehended the truth godly way, Supreme Lord of Original Sin had told him that the truth godly way was a rule-making technique that also possessed the power to break rules. However, the 5 elements godly way that the girl from the G clan cultivated could easily restrain him. The 5 elements godly way was inseparable. If he were to meet an opponent who also cultivated the 5 elements godly way, he probably wouldn't be able to see through the flaws in it. Right now, to Nathan, the magnetic sacred mountain was a whole entity, with a single bright white speck of light. It was the same with the magnetic power in Zen's hand. There was not the slightest flaw. How could this fellow possess the G clan's technique? As he gritted his teeth, his gaze shifted and landed on Lucille. When Lucille saw Nathan's gaze shift over, she waved a hand helplessly. She had not expected Zen to enter the final battle and face off against Nathan. If she had known this, she would have waited until the illusion battlefield was over before she brought up the exchange with Zen. And then, Zen moved. Nathan's spear light could destroy almost everything. Even though Zen had used the power of the Thunderbolt Annihilation to gain some advantage, Nathan had still broken it pretty easily. Since the magnetic sacred mountain could restrain Nathan, it was time for Zen to launch a counterattack. Zen flipped backwards on the mountaintop and floated in the air. The magnetic sacred mountain then slid down along the heaven-earth board for a distance before the huge mountain shot out and pressed down directly on Nathan. A whirring sound could be heard. It wouldn't have been a big deal if it had been an ordinary mountain. Nathan could destroy 10 ordinary mountains with a single spear strike. But the magnetic sacred mountain didn't have any flaws. All he could do as it drew nearer was run. He ran quickly, and in a burst of shadows, his body disappeared from where he stood. Boom! A loud sound echoed and the entire heaven-earth board was crushed to pieces. Nathan succeeded in avoiding the crush and appeared on the other side of the magnetic sacred mountain. There you are. Let's end the battle now. The ball of cyan light in Zen's hand had condensed a long time ago. The moment Nathan appeared, he waved his hand and the ball of light turned into a thin line that shot straight towards Nathan. The sword light full of sharp magnetic power was unbelievably fast as it made its way to Nathan. Just as Nathan steadied himself, he sensed an impending crisis and suddenly rolled aside. The magnetic power pierced through his face, blood spurting out in all directions. It left a gaping, bloody mark on his face. There was no change in Zen's expression. If Nathan had wanted to reverse the situation, just one spear would have worked. Zen would not have been able to block his terrifying spear, so he had to suppress him, giving him no chance to fight back. The magnetic sacred mountain behind Zen rose up and he stood on top of it, once again pushing down fiercely towards Nathan. All the while, Zen kept drawing out the magnetic power. But Nathan had suffered once and had no intention of making a second mistake. So this time, he rushed towards the magnetic sacred mountain like a lithe bat. Before the mountain could come crashing onto the board, he charged from the other side of the mountain to circle above it. Once he had confirmed Zen's location on the mountain, he sent his long spear shooting straight at Zen. Nathan hadn't thought that he would be at such a disadvantage against Zen. And right now, he was ready to risk everything. The tip of his spear was shining with a purple light. La spear strike. Die. Illusory purple spears shot out in 3 directions like 3 long snakes. They crawled down towards the ground, turned 90 degrees, and shot explosively towards Zen from 3 different directions. Any spear could hit Zen and destroy him. If Nathan had one chance, he would be able to grab a complete victory. This was the technique of the truth godly way. Nathan and his 3 spear shadows quickly grew larger in Zen's eyes. His body didn't pause even for a moment. He knew how powerful these spear shadows were. He climbed upwards along the magnetic sacred mountain, the 3 purple spears following close behind. The 2 of them followed each other as they continued to circle the mountain. It was beginning to become too much for the others to take it all in. In the end, who has the advantage? I can't say for sure. Zen seems to be afraid of Nathan's spear skills, but his mountain seems invincible. I can't see their figures clearly anymore. While Nathan was chasing after Zen, the first purple spear shadow took the shortest way to block Zen. As the spear came to block Zen, the cyan magnetic power in Zen's hand suddenly changed, transforming into a crystal shield the size of a palm, protecting Zen. With this shield before him, Zen charged ahead, regardless of the spear. Nathan smirked as he watched Zen court death and not dodge the spear. The thought had just sprouted in his mind when he saw Zen shatter the purple spear shadow. He was shocked. How was this possible? This caused Nathan to hesitate, his usually rock-like confidence wavering. Zen had used his own body to withstand his law spear strike. He began to realize that he was playing a losing game. And when Zen turned around, he saw a small cyan crystal shield in Zen's hand. He couldn't help but curse, "This guy is really the bane of my life."